The night my son tried to humiliate me, I was standing beneath crystal chandeliers in a crowded charity hall, wearing the same blue dress I had owned for 23 years. Daniel smiled for the cameras, then leaned into the microphone and told everyone I was old, confused, and embarrassing the family. For one breathless second, I felt every eye in that room turn toward me. My hands trembled. My heart broke. But then something happened he never expected. One woman stood up, then a man, then another, and within minutes, the entire crowd was no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at my son with disgust. Before I tell you what happened that night, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if stories about family dignity and truth speak to your heart. And I'd love to know what you think. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you loved? Comment your thoughts below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Eleanor Parker, and for most of my life, I was the kind of woman people noticed only when they needed something. A warm meal after surgery. A ride to the clinic when the snow was too deep. Someone to sit beside a hospital bed when the family was too far away, too busy, or too tired to come. I was a nurse for 37 years in Maple Ridge, Ohio, a town small enough that people remembered your pie recipe, but large enough to forget your pain if you learned to hide it well. I learned to hide mine beautifully. After my husband Thomas died, I stayed in the same White House on Birch Lane where we had raised our only son Daniel. The paint had peeled a little around the porch rails. The kitchen cabinets stuck in the summer. The upstairs hallway still creaked in the exact same place it had creaked when Daniel was 10 years old and sneaking out of bed to ask for one more glass of water. To anyone driving by, it was just an old house owned by an old woman. To me, it was a museum of every life I had ever loved. Thomas had planted the maple tree in the front yard the spring after Daniel was born. He used to say, "One day that tree will be bigger than all of us, Ellie. It'll remember us when we're gone." I used to laugh and tell him trees did not remember. But after he passed, I found myself touching that rough bark some mornings as if it were a shoulder. I was 68 years old when the night at the charity gala happened. By then, Thomas had been gone 9 years. I still wore my hair in a soft gray bob because he once told me it made me look like a woman who knew exactly where she was going. I still kept his work boots by the back door, though I knew very well he would never walk through it again. Grief does strange things to a person. It does not always make you weep. Sometimes it makes you polish a pair of boots no one wears. Daniel used to be a sweet boy. I need you to understand that before I tell you what he became. He was not born cruel. He was not one of those children who kicked dogs or laughed when someone fell. When he was little, he had the softest heart I had ever seen. He cried when his goldfish died. He saved pennies in a coffee can for the animal shelter. When I came home, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, he would bring me a blanket and say, "Mama, you sit down." I'm the nurse now. That boy was real. I held him. I raised him. I loved him with the kind of love that rearranges a woman from the inside out. Maybe that was why it hurt so much when he began to disappear. It did not happen all at once. People like to imagine betrayal as a door slamming shut. In my experience, it is more like a light dimming so slowly that by the time the room is dark, you cannot remember when you stopped being able to see. Daniel got a scholarship to Ohio State. Thomas and I were so proud we drove 3 hours just to look at the campus before move-in day. We could not afford the nice hotel downtown, so we stayed at a roadside motel with a humming ice machine and a carpet that smelled faintly of cigarettes. But Daniel did not complain. Back then, he hugged us both in the parking lot and said, "I'm going to make you proud." And he did, for a while. He studied business, then real estate development. He had a mind for numbers and a smile that made people trust him too quickly. After graduation, he moved to Columbus, then Cincinnati, then back near Maple Ridge when he started making real money. By his late 30s, he wore tailored suits, drove a black Mercedes, and spoke in phrases like strategic growth and legacy opportunities. I tried to be proud of all of it. I truly did. When he bought his first expensive watch, I told him it was handsome. When he showed me photos of luxury apartments his company had developed, I said they looked beautiful. When he took me to lunch at restaurants where the menus did not have prices and the waiters described the chicken as if it had a college degree, I smiled and used the right fork as best I could. But the more Daniel gained, the more embarrassed he seemed by where he came from. At first, it was little things. He stopped calling me Mama and started calling me Mom in a clipped voice, especially around his colleagues. Then he began correcting me in public. If I said supper, he would say, "Dinner, Mom." If I asked a waitress how her day was going, he would smile tightly and say, "She's working, Mom. Don't bother her." If I wore my old beige coat, the one Thomas bought me on our 25th anniversary, Daniel would sigh and say, "I really need to take you shopping." He said it like kindness. It felt like shame. I told myself he was busy. I told myself successful people lived under pressures I did not understand. I told myself every mother must learn to step back when her child becomes important. But deep down, in the quiet place where truth waits for us, I knew something had changed. He no longer saw me as the woman who had packed his lunches, sat through his fevers, and worked double shifts so he could have braces and school trips and a winter coat that did not come from the church donation box. He saw me as evidence of struggle, evidence of poverty, evidence of a past he wanted polished out of every photograph. There was one Christmas dinner about 5 years before the gala that I still remember with a sharpness that embarrasses me. Daniel had invited me to his new house, a huge brick place with white columns and windows taller than my first apartment. His wife, Claire, had decorated everything in silver and cream. Even the Christmas tree looked too expensive to touch. I brought a sweet potato casserole in my old blue baking dish, the one with a tiny chip near the handle. It was the same recipe Daniel used to beg for when he was young. Claire opened the door, looked at the dish, and smiled without warmth. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, "you didn't have to bring anything." "I know," I said. Daniel always liked this. Daniel came into the foyer then. His eyes went first to the casserole, then to my coat, then to the guests behind him. A few people from his firm were standing near the fireplace with glasses of wine. "Mom," he whispered. Taking the dish from me too quickly, we had the meal catered. I thought it might be nice to have something homemade. He laughed under his breath, not loudly, not cruelly enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. Mothers notice the smallest knives. "That's sweet," he said. "But next time, just ask first." Next time. There was always a next time in those days. Next time, wear something darker. Next time, don't mention Dad's old truck. Next time, let me handle the conversation. Next time, please don't tell people you worked as a nurse's aide before becoming an RN. They don't need every detail. Every instruction came wrapped in a smile. Every correction was softened by a kiss on the cheek. That was how he kept me confused. If he had shouted, I might have defended myself. But he did not shout. He edited me. Piece by piece, my son tried to make me presentable. The strange thing was, I had never been ashamed of my life. Not once. I had changed bedpans, held dying hands, cleaned wounds, comforted widows, and delivered casseroles to families who were one disaster away from hunger. I had known exhaustion so deep my bones ached. I had known bills stacked on the kitchen table like accusations. But I had also known purpose. I had known love. Daniel seemed to believe dignity came from marble countertops and private schools and having your name printed on brass plaques. I knew dignity came from what you did when no one was clapping. What Daniel did not know was that after Thomas died, my life did not become as small as he imagined. Quiet, yes. Lonely at times, certainly, but not small. Thomas had been careful with money in a way that looked ordinary from the outside. He worked as an electrician for 30 years, took side jobs on weekends, and never bought a new truck when a used one would run. I had my nursing pension. We invested modestly, steadily, never bragging, never flashing. When he passed, he left me with more security than anyone guessed. But I did not spend it on diamonds or cruises. I spent it the way Thomas and I had lived, quietly. There were prescriptions paid for at Patterson's pharmacy under community assistance. There were winter heating bills covered for widows who thought the church had helped them. There were grocery cards mailed anonymously to families after factory layoffs. And later, when Willow Creek Community Center nearly closed, there were checks sent through an attorney because I did not want my name on a wall. I did not do those things because I was noble. I did them because I remembered what it felt like to count coins at the grocery store while pretending not to panic. Daniel never asked about that part of my life. He assumed that because my house was old, my car was old, and my dresses came from department store clearance racks, I had nothing of value left to give. Daniel met Claire at a business luncheon in Cincinnati, though he described it later as if fate itself had arranged the seating chart. She understands ambition, he told me the first time he brought her to my house. That should have told me something. Not she's kind, not she makes me laugh. Not you'll love her mom. He said she understood ambition as though love were a corporate merger and not a place to rest your heart. Claire was beautiful in a polished way, the kind of woman who seemed finished before she entered a room. Her blonde hair was always smooth, her nails always pale pink, her smile always measured. She wore perfume that lingered after she left, expensive and cold, like flowers arranged in a lobby no one was allowed to touch. The first time she came to Birch Lane, she stepped into my kitchen and looked around without moving her head much. Her eyes traveled over the yellow curtains, the worn linoleum, the row of medicine bottles I had organized for Mrs. Alvarez next door, and the old refrigerator with Daniel's childhood drawings still tucked beneath magnets. How charming, she said. There are words people use when they mean something else. Charming was one of them. I had made chicken and dumplings because Daniel used to love them. I set the table with my blue plates, the ones Thomas and I bought piece by piece from a department store sale when we were first married. Daniel ate quickly and talked too loudly about a commercial property he was negotiating. Claire listened, with her hand resting lightly on his wrist, nodding at all the right moments. When I asked her about her family, she gave me a thin smile. My parents are in Scottsdale now, she said. Dad retired from private equity. Mom is involved in several museum boards. I nodded like I understood that world. That sounds lovely, I said. It's good to stay useful. Claire blinked, as if usefulness was not quite the word she would have chosen for women like her mother. After dinner, while I was clearing plates, I heard her whisper to Daniel in the living room. She's sweet, Claire said. Very simple. Very simple. I stood in my kitchen holding a stack of dishes and felt something inside me go quiet. Daniel did not defend me. He did not say I had worked 37 years as a nurse, or that I had helped half the town through illness and grief, or that there was nothing simple about surviving loss with grace. He only chuckled softly the way men do when they want to agree without sounding unkind. She's old-fashioned, he said. You'll get used to her. I rinsed the plates longer than necessary that night. After Daniel married Claire, everything became more careful. Not better. Careful. There were invitations, yes, but they always came with conditions. Thanksgiving at their house, but I should not bring food unless Claire requested something. Christmas Eve dinner, but I should wear the navy dress Daniel bought me because it looked more appropriate. A company picnic, but I should avoid talking about my nursing stories because some people were sensitive around medical details. At first, I tried to follow the rules. I told myself marriage changed a man. I told myself Claire was simply from a different background. I told myself Daniel was trying to move in circles where everything, even family, had to be presented properly, but the rules kept multiplying. One afternoon, he came to pick me up for lunch with one of his investors. I walked out wearing my beige coat and carrying my old black purse, the one with a repaired strap. Daniel sat in his Mercedes at the curb, watching me through the windshield. He did not smile. When I opened the passenger door, he looked at my purse. Mom, he said, Do you not have the leather one I gave you? I do, I said, lowering myself into the seat. But this one has all my things in it. It looks worn. It is worn. So am I. I meant it as a joke. He did not laugh. He pulled away from the curb and said, "You know, appearances matter in my line of work." I looked out the window at the maple tree, its leaves gold against the gray sky. "I thought we were just having lunch." "We are," he said, "but people notice details." The lunch was at a restaurant with white tablecloths and tiny servings placed in the center of large plates. The investor Meister Langley was kind enough. When he asked where I lived, I told him Birch Lane. His face brightened. "My grandmother lived near there," he said. "Good people in that neighborhood." Before I could answer, Daniel stepped in. "Mom has been there forever," he said with a little laugh. "We've tried to get her somewhere more comfortable, but she's stubborn." I felt the word land between us. Stubborn, not loyal, not rooted, not sentimental. Stubborn. Mr. Langley smiled politely, but I saw him glance at me with that soft look people give when they think an older woman is difficult and her son is patient. Daniel had done that more and more lately. He changed the meaning of me in front of people. If I kept my old car, I was stubborn. If I saved plastic containers, I was stuck in the past. If I asked a cashier how her mother was doing after surgery, I was holding up the line. If I remembered a neighbor's birthday, I was meddling. Every ordinary kindness became something embarrassing when Daniel narrated it. The worst part was how gently he did it. He never slammed his fist on a table. He never called me useless directly. He simply tilted his head, lowered his voice, and explained me away. Mom gets confused by technology. Mom still thinks everyone wants a long conversation. Mom doesn't really understand how things work now. Mom means well. Those 3 words became a cage. Mom means well. It was what he said when I spoke too honestly. It was what he said when I wore the wrong thing. It was what he said when I mentioned Thomas in front of people Daniel wanted to impress. It was what he said when I existed too fully in a room where he wanted me small. Claire was worse, though. She was never messy about it. She had a talent for making cruelty sound like advice. "Eleanor," she said once, standing in my hallway after dropping off a birthday gift I had not asked for, "have you ever considered letting someone help you update the house?" It feels a little sad in here. I looked around at the framed photographs, the crocheted blanket over Thomas's chair, the chipped bowl on the entry table where he used to drop his keys. Sad, I asked. She touched my arm. "I only mean Daniel is becoming more visible in the community now. People may start paying attention to his background. It would be nice if everything reflected where he is today. Where he is today, as if I were where he was yesterday." That evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table after she left, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. I thought about calling Daniel and telling him his wife had hurt me, but I knew how it would go. He would sigh, tell me Claire meant well, then suggest I was being too sensitive. Older women hear that phrase too often. Too sensitive. It is what people say when they do not want to admit they were unkind. Months passed, then years. Daniel's business grew. His name appeared in local magazines beside words like visionary leader and philanthropist. He joined boards. He hosted dinners. He shook hands with mayors and bankers and men who wore smiles like contracts. And I became someone he managed. He visited less, but when he did, he inspected my life as if it were a property he planned to renovate. He checked the porch steps. He opened the refrigerator. He asked whether I was still driving at night. He suggested grocery delivery, then a cleaning service, then a senior living community with walking paths and a dining room. "I'm not helpless," I told him once. "I didn't say you were," he replied. "No," I said quietly. "You just keep acting like it." For a moment, I saw irritation flash across his face. Not guilt, irritation. Mom, I'm trying to take care of you. Taking care of me, I learned, meant making me easier to explain. Claire began encouraging him to include me only when it benefited the image they were building. A photograph on Mother's Day, a short visit at Thanksgiving, a sentimental mention in speeches about humble beginnings. They did not want the fullness of me with my opinions and memories and grief. They wanted the outline of me, the hard-working mother, the modest home, the touching origin story. I was useful as long as I remained quiet. Once at a small campaign dinner for a redevelopment proposal, Daniel introduced me to a councilman by placing his hand on my shoulder as though I might wander off. "This is my mother, Eleanor," he said warmly. "She sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities." The councilman smiled. "You must be very proud." "I am," I said. And I was. That was the terrible truth. Even then, beneath all the hurt, I was proud of the boy I had raised, or perhaps proud of the memory of him. Daniel squeezed my shoulder just a little too firmly. "She still lives in the old neighborhood," he added. "Won't let me move her out." Everyone laughed gently. I smiled because I did not know what else to do. But inside, something was beginning to harden. Not hatred. Never hatred. A boundary, though I did not yet have the courage to name it. I began to understand that Daniel did not simply feel embarrassed by me. He needed me to feel embarrassed by myself. That was the only way his version of success made sense. If my quiet life had dignity, if my old house had meaning, if my sacrifices had value, then he would have to admit he had been looking down on the very foundation that held him up. So he kept lowering me in front of others, and I kept pretending not to notice, until the day he called and invited me to the Willow Creek Gala. By then, I already knew my son was ashamed of me. What I did not know was that he was about to use that shame as a weapon in front of an entire town. The Willow Creek Community Center sat on the east side of Maple Ridge between a Methodist church with red doors and an old grocery store that had been closed for nearly a decade. It was not beautiful in the way Daniel and Claire understood beauty. There were no marble floors, no glass walls, no fountains whispering in a courtyard. The bricks were faded. The parking lot had cracks wide enough for weeds to grow through. The front sign leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times someone tried to straighten it. But to me, Willow Creek was sacred ground. I had seen children get free lunches there during summers when school cafeterias closed. I had watched lonely widowers play checkers under buzzing fluorescent lights just so they would not have to eat supper alone. I had taken blood pressure readings in the back room every second Tuesday of the month, setting up my little folding table beside a stack of donated coats and a bulletin board full of handwritten notices. Lost cat, Bible study, free legal clinic, grief support group, senior dance Friday at 6. It was the kind of place wealthy people called outdated until they needed a story about community. When Daniel said the gala was for Willow Creek, my hand tightened around the phone. "What kind of event?" I asked. "A fundraising gala," he said. "A major one. Black tie optional, though you don't need to worry about that. Just wear something nice." "Something nice." He said it quickly as if he already feared what I might choose. I looked down at myself. I was wearing a pale cardigan over a house dress, and there was flour on my sleeve from making biscuits for my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez. The kitchen smelled of butter and coffee. Outside, the maple tree scratched softly against the window in the afternoon wind. "Why are you involved with Willow Creek?" I asked. There was a pause. "Not long enough for most people to notice, but mothers hear pauses the way musicians hear wrong notes." "Our firm is sponsoring part of the event," he said. "And I'm being recognized for my community leadership." "Community leadership," I repeated. "Yes, Mom. I didn't know you had been spending time at Willow Creek." Another pause. "I've been involved behind the scenes." Behind the scenes. That was one of Daniel's favorite places to claim without ever proving he had been there. I walked to the kitchen table and sat down slowly. My knees ached that day. Rain was coming. I could feel it in my joints before the weather report ever mentioned clouds. What exactly would you like me to do? I asked. Just come, sit with us, smile, let people see the family side of things. The family side of things. I stared at Thomas's photograph on the wall. In it, he was standing in front of the house, one hand on Daniel's shoulder, both of them squinting into the sun. Daniel was 13 then, all elbows and hope. Is Claire going? I asked. Of course. Does she want me there? He gave a small laugh, too polished to be real. Mom, don't start that. I'm not starting anything. I'm asking. She thinks it would be good. Good. Not meaningful. Not lovely. Good. The word sat in my ear like a cold coin. Daniel cleared his throat. There will be photographers, local press board members, donors. It's important. I need everything to go smoothly. There it was again. I need. Not, I want you beside me. Not you belong there. I need. I ran my finger along a scratch in the kitchen table one Thomas had made years earlier while repairing a lamp. Daniel, I said quietly, are you inviting me as your mother or as part of your image? Silence came through the line. Then he sighed. Why do you always make things emotional? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I was tired. A mother could carry a child in her bodywork until her feet swelled, sit through fevers, forgive neglect, swallow disrespect, and still be accused of making things emotional the first time she asked to be treated like a person. I asked a simple question, I said, and I gave you a simple answer. I want you there. Want. He said it after being pushed to the edge of honesty, and perhaps that was enough for the foolish part of my heart. When is it? I asked. Saturday evening, 6 o'clock, at the Ridgeview Grand Ballroom. That surprised me. Not at Willow Creek No Mom. You don't hold a high-level donor gala in a community center gym. There was a sharpness in his voice that told me he regretted saying it as soon as the words left his mouth. I let it pass. The Ridgeview Grand Ballroom was the fanciest venue in town, attached to a hotel where visiting executives stayed, and brides posed on the staircase beneath crystal chandeliers. Thomas and I had once attended a retirement dinner there for a doctor I worked with. I remembered feeling uncomfortable at first, then laughing when Thomas whispered, Ellie, don't worry. The Forks are more scared of you than you are of them. I smiled at the memory, then felt it fade. What should I bring? I asked. Nothing, Daniel said quickly. Absolutely nothing. The way he said it made my chest tighten. I wasn't planning to bring a casserole to a ballroom. I know. I just mean, don't worry about anything. We'll handle it. We. He and Claire, the polished unit, the beautiful couple, the public face. Then his voice softened in that careful way I had come to distrust. And Mom. Yes. Please don't bring up old stories. What old stories? You know. Dad working 2 jobs. You doing night shifts. Us struggling. Things like that. I leaned back in my chair. But isn't that part of your story? It is? He said, but there's a way to frame it. A way to frame poverty so it looks inspiring, but not uncomfortable, he exhaled. That's not what I meant. It sounded close. Mom, this is exactly why I'm saying it. You don't always understand how things sound in those rooms. Those rooms. As if I had spent my life outside every room that mattered. I looked toward the hallway where my nursing license still hung in a simple wooden frame. I had been in rooms where babies took their first breath, and rooms where old men took their last. I had been in rooms where women learned their cancer had returned, where families fought over hospital forms, where strangers prayed because they had no one else. I had stood in rooms full of blood, fear, mercy, and truth. But Daniel meant donor rooms, money rooms, rooms where people pretended not to notice suffering unless suffering came with a podium and a pledge card. I understand more than you think I said. I'm not trying to insult you. That was Daniel's favorite defense, as if harm disappeared when a person claimed it was accidental. He continued, just let me guide the evening. If someone asks you something, keep it simple. Say you're proud of me. Say you're happy to support Willow Creek. No need to get into personal details. I closed my eyes. There were so many things I wanted to say. I wanted to ask him when my memories became liabilities. I wanted to ask why his father's sacrifices were acceptable in a speech, but not in his mother's mouth. I wanted to ask whether he knew anything at all about Willow Creek, about the people who had kept that place alive with bake sales and raffle tickets and anonymous envelopes slid under office doors. But I did not. Not yet, because beneath the hurt, something else had begun moving inside me. A question. Why now? For years, Daniel had kept me away from his public life unless I could be controlled. Now, he wanted me visible at the most important local event of the season. He was not sentimental. He was not careless. If he wanted me there, there was a reason. And because the event was tied to Willow Creek, I could not refuse. Not after everything that place had meant to me. Not after what Thomas and I had done quietly. Not after the promise I had made beside his hospital bed, when his hands were already growing cold, and his voice had become a whisper. Ellie, he had said, if there's enough left, use it where it matters. Don't let them put my name on anything. Just help people stay standing. So I had. For 9 years, through an attorney named Samuel Brooks, I had sent money where it was needed. I had paid utility bills, funded the senior lunch program, replaced the broken furnace, and helped cover the mortgage when Willow Creek nearly shut its doors. Very few people knew. Samuel knew. The director knew. A handful of board members knew only that an Eleanor Parker Trust existed, though most had never connected that name with the old nurse from Birch Lane. Daniel did not know. He thought my life had shrunk after Thomas died. He thought I clipped coupons because I had to drove my old Buick because I had no choice, and kept my house because I was too sentimental to understand value. He had mistaken quietness for emptiness. "Mom," he said, "are you still there?" I opened my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I'm here, so you'll come." I looked again at Thomas's photograph. "Yes," I said, "I'll come." "Good," Daniel replied, relief rushing into his voice. "Claire will text you the details. And Mom," I waited. "Please let her help you choose what to wear." There was a time when that would have made me cry. That day it only made me still. "I already know what I'm wearing," I said. He hesitated. "Is it appropriate?" "It's blue," I answered. "Your father loved it." Daniel said nothing. For a moment, I wondered if grief had touched him somewhere beneath all that ambition. Then his professional voice returned. "Okay, just make sure it's pressed." After we hung up, I remained at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the stove. Outside, the first drops of rain began tapping against the window. I thought about Daniel standing beneath chandeliers, accepting applause for loving a community he barely understood. I thought about Claire, arranging me like a prop beside him. I thought about Willow Creek, that faded brick building where dignity had been handed out in paper cups of coffee and free blood pressure checks. Then I rose, went upstairs, and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The blue dress lay folded beneath tissue paper. I touched the fabric gently. For the first time in years, I had the strange feeling that Thomas was standing somewhere close, not warning me to stay home, but asking me to stand tall when I arrived. I did not know yet that my son planned to shame me. But I knew enough to understand this. Something about that gala was not honest. And if Daniel thought I was coming as a quiet old woman who would smile on command, he had forgotten the one thing every nurse learns. We know how to stay calm when a room begins to fall apart. Claire's text arrived the next morning before I had even finished my coffee. It was not a message, so much as an assignment. "Eleanor for Saturday. Please wear something elegant but understated. Daniel says you have a blue dress. Send me a photo if you want feedback. Also, avoid heavy jewelry. Simple is best. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it face down on the kitchen table. Simple is best. There was that word again, wearing a nicer dress this time. I did not send her a photo. I did not ask for feedback. I went upstairs, took the blue dress from the cedar chest, hung it on the closet door, and steamed it myself. It was not fashionable. It had no designer label, but the fabric still held its shape, and when I touched the sleeve, I could almost feel Thomas's hand at the small of my back, guiding me across a church basement dance floor 25 years earlier. That dress had seen real love. It did not need Claire's approval. Around noon, Daniel called and asked if he could stop by. He sounded casual, but there was a stiffness beneath his voice. "I have a few things to go over before Saturday," he said. "What things? Just logistics." In Daniel's world, anything unpleasant was called logistics. He arrived an hour later in his black Mercedes parking at the curb instead of pulling into the driveway. That small choice told me more than he meant it to. When he was a boy, he used to race up that driveway on his bicycle skid to a stop near the porch and shout for me to come see how fast he could go. Now he sat for a moment behind tinted glass, as if gathering strength to enter the life he had outgrown. When he came in, he kissed my cheek lightly and looked around the house. Not warmly, evaluating. His eyes moved over the front room Thomas's recliner, the quilt basket, the framed school photo of Daniel in 3rd grade with one front tooth missing the old piano no one had played since my husband died. Then his gaze settled on the small crack near the ceiling. "You really should let someone look at that," he said. "It's been there 4 years. That's not reassuring. It hasn't moved." "Mom." He said my name as though patience were a gift he was tired of giving. I led him into the kitchen and poured coffee, though he did not ask for any. He sat at the table in his expensive coat, checking his watch. I noticed he did not take it off, which meant he did not plan to stay long. On the table, he placed a slim folder. My stomach tightened. "What's that?" I asked. "Something I want you to review. There are moments when the body understands danger before the mind does." My hands went cold before I ever opened the folder. Inside were papers clipped neatly together with colored tabs along the side. The top page had my name printed in bold letters, Eleanor Ruth Parker. Below that was a heading about property assessment, relocation planning, and the senior living options. I looked up at Daniel. "What is this?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Mom, before you get upset, just listen. That is how people begin when they already know they have done something wrong." "I'm listening," I said. He took a breath. "The neighborhood is changing. You know that. Birch Lane isn't what it used to be." "It is exactly what it used to be," I said. "People living in houses, children walking to school, Mrs. Alvarez burning toast every morning at 7. He gave me a tired smile. "That's sentimental. No, Daniel. That's a neighborhood." He ignored that and tapped the papers. "A development group is looking at several properties in the area. Nothing is final, but there may be a very good opportunity for you. For me, yes. You could sell before the area gets complicated. Take a strong offer. Move somewhere safer, easier, more comfortable." I stared at him. "Somewhere like a senior facility." He held up a hand. "Not a facility, a community. There's a beautiful place outside Dayton. Private apartments, dining room, walking trails, medical staff nearby. Claire and I toured it last month." The words settled between us slowly. "You toured a senior home for me," I said without asking me. "It's not a home. It's independent living. You toured it without asking me." His jaw tightened. I was trying to be proactive. "Proactive?" I repeated softly. That's a fine word for deciding what happens to someone else's life. He leaned back. "Mom, you're 68. I am aware." "You live alone." "I am aware of that too. This house is old. The steps are steep. The pipes are outdated. You still drive that Buick with one working speaker. How long do you think this can continue?" The question hurt more than I wanted it to. Not because I believed him, but because beneath the insult was the one fear aging places quietly in every woman's heart. How long can I continue? I looked past him to the window above the sink. Outside, the maple tree swayed in the wind, its branches bare and stubborn. "This house is mine," I said. "Nobody is saying it isn't. You are sitting at my table with papers already printed, because I wanted you to have information." "No," I said. "You wanted me to have pressure." Daniel's face changed. The polite mask slipped just a little. "Do you know what that property is worth?" he asked. "I know what it cost." "That's not the same thing." "No," I said, "it isn't." He rubbed a hand over his mouth the way Thomas used to when he was holding back frustration, but Thomas's frustration had always come with tenderness. Daniel's came with calculation. "You could get a very generous offer," he said. "More than the house is worth on its own." Generous from whom he looked away. And there it was. A silence too full to be innocent. "Daniel," I said, "who wants my house?" He stood and walked to the counter, though he did not need anything there. "There are investors looking at the whole strip. Birch Lane, parts of Hawthorne, maybe the empty grocery property near Willow Creek." Willow Creek. He turned back too quickly. Not the center itself. Not yet. His eyes sharpened. "That's not fair. What does your company have to do with this?" He smiled then, but it was not a son's smile. It was the kind of smile a man gives across a conference table when he wants to hide the sharpest part of a deal. "We're consulting, helping shape a proposal that could revitalize the area." I almost laughed. Revitalize, another fine word, like logistics, like proactive, like community. Words polished smooth enough that ordinary people could not see the blade, and my house is in the way, I said. "No," he answered quickly. Too quickly. "Your house is part of the opportunity. For whom? For everyone." "Does everyone include Mrs. Alvarez? Does it include Mr. Jenkins down the street, who still walks with a cane, because his hip never healed, right? Does it include the women from Willow Creek, who come here every Thursday for coffee because this is the only porch where nobody judges them for being lonely?" Daniel's cheeks flushed. "You're making this emotional again." "Because people are emotional, Daniel. Homes are emotional. Neighborhoods are emotional. You cannot put a price on every place that ever held someone together." He stared at me, and for the first time that day, I saw the truth behind his impatience. He was not only worried about me, he was worried I would interfere. My old house was not just an embarrassment anymore, it was an obstacle. I picked up the papers and began turning pages. There were estimates, photographs of senior living apartments, legal phrases about preliminary intent relocation benefits, and a page marked with a small yellow tab where my signature would go. My signature. Already marked? A strange calm came over me. Nurses know that calm. It arrives in emergencies when panic would waste time. I had felt it during strokes, heart attacks, falls, births that came too early, deaths that came too slowly. Now I felt it at my own kitchen table while my son waited for me to surrender my home. I closed the folder. "No." Daniel blinked. "You haven't even reviewed everything." "I reviewed enough?" "Mom, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." "My answer is no." His voice dropped. "You don't understand the scale of this. I understand more than you think." "No, you don't." His hand came down on the table, not hard enough to be a slap, but hard enough to make my coffee tremble in the cup. "You think this is about curtains and memories?" "It's not. This is about your future." "My future belongs to me. I'm your son, and I am your mother, not your property." That stopped him. For a moment, something like shame passed over his face. It was faint, almost gone before I recognized it. Then he gathered himself, smoothed his coat, and became the man from magazine photographs again. "Fine," he said. "We don't have to decide today. I have decided today." He forced a small laugh. "Let's not ruin the weekend." There it was. The gala, the cameras, the donors, the award. He still needed me pleasant. He took the folder and slid it back toward himself, though I noticed he left one loose page behind. Maybe by accident, maybe because he was rattled. Daniel rarely made mistakes when he was calm. As he stood to leave, he kissed my cheek again. This time his lips were cold. "Just think about it," he said. "I have." He paused at the kitchen doorway. "And Saturday, Mom, please don't mention any of this." I looked at him, really looked at him. My only child, my little boy, my greatest love, standing in the house where he had learned to walk, asking me to keep quiet while he tried to help erase it. "No," I said softly. "I don't suppose you'd want people hearing about this." His eyes narrowed. Then he smiled. Not with warmth, not with affection, with warning. "Enjoy the gala," he said. After he left, I sat at the table until the sound of his car faded down Birch Lane. Then I picked up the loose page. It was a map. Birch Lane was marked in blue. The empty grocery store was marked in green. And there, circled in red near the edge of the proposed redevelopment zone, was Willow Creek Community Center. I stared at that red circle until the lines blurred. Daniel had not invited me to the gala because he remembered I cared about Willow Creek. He had invited me because the entire night was part of something bigger. And my house, my neighborhood, and maybe even the center Thomas had asked me to protect were all standing in his way. Saturday arrived with a pale winter sun and a silence in the house that felt almost ceremonial. I spent most of the morning doing ordinary things, because ordinary things keep a person steady. I watered the fern in the front window. I folded towels still warm from the dryer. I made a pot of vegetable soup for Mrs. Alvarez and left it on her porch with a note taped to the lid. Then I came home, stood at the bottom of my stairs, and looked up toward my bedroom, as if I were about to climb into a memory. The blue dress was waiting on the closet door. I bathed, pinned my gray hair back with 2 pearl clips Thomas had given me years ago, and put on a small pair of earrings. Nothing heavy, nothing impressive, just 2 tiny drops of silver that had once belonged to my mother. Then I stepped into the dress. It fit more snugly than it had 23 years earlier, but not badly. The sleeves softened my arms. The color brought warmth to my face. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see a wealthy woman or a fashionable woman or even a woman ready for a gala. I saw a wife who had been loved. That was enough. For a moment, I pressed my hand against the dresser and closed my eyes. I could almost hear Thomas behind me. "You look beautiful, Ellie," I whispered. "Come with me tonight?" The house answered with silence, but not an empty one. I drove myself to the Ridgeview Grand Ballroom in my old Buick because Daniel had not offered to pick me up. Claire had texted that valet parking would be available, as if my greatest concern would be finding a space rather than surviving an evening beside people who treated kindness like a social defect. The Buick rattled a little on the highway, the heater clicking in protest, before giving me warm air. I drove past darkened storefronts, past the pharmacy, where I had once paid for strangers' prescriptions, past the turn that led toward Willow Creek. The community center was not visible from the main road, but I felt its presence like a hand on my shoulder. When I pulled up to the hotel entrance, 2 young valets in red jackets looked briefly surprised by my car, but one of them stepped forward with a smile. "Good evening, ma'am." "Good evening," I said, handing him the keys. He glanced down at the Buick keyring, a faded plastic heart Daniel had given me when he was 8. "Nice night for an event." "Yes," I said. "Let's hope it stays that way." Inside the lobby glowed with gold light. Women in sequined dresses moved across the marble floor like reflections on water. Men in dark suits laughed in clusters near tall floral arrangements. Somewhere, a string quartet played a song I recognized but could not name. For a second, I felt the old nervousness rise in me. The room smelled of perfume, champagne, and money. My shoes, though polished, were not new. My dress did not shimmer. My hands showed my age. I nearly turned toward the restroom just to gather myself. Then I remembered the map on my kitchen table. Birch Lane in blue, Willow Creek in red, and my spine straightened. Daniel saw me before I reached the ballroom doors. He was standing near a photographer with Claire at his side. Claire wore a cream gown that looked poured onto her diamonds at her throat. Her blonde hair swept into a smooth twist. Daniel's tuxedo fit him perfectly. They looked like the kind of couple magazines printed beside words like success and vision. His eyes landed on my dress. For one small, cruel second, disappointment crossed his face. Then he smiled for the room. "Mom," he said warmly, walking toward me with open arms. "There are embraces meant for love and embraces meant for witnesses." Daniel gave me the second kind. His arms closed around me carefully, his cheek barely touching mine. "You made it," he said. "I said I would." Claire kissed the air near my cheek. "Eleanor, that color is sentimental." I smiled. "Yes, it is." Her eyes flicked to my pearl clips, then to my shoes. "How sweet." Daniel placed a hand lightly at my back and guided me toward a group of people near the entrance. "There are a few donors I want you to meet." And just like that, I became part of the display. "This is my mother, Eleanor," Daniel said to a tall man with silver hair and a woman wearing emerald earrings. "She raised me with nothing but hard work and faith." I looked at him. Nothing but hard work and faith. It was not entirely untrue. That was what made it dangerous. The tall man smiled. "You must be very proud of your son." "I have been proud of Daniel many times," I said. Daniel's hand tightened slightly against my back. The woman laughed politely, though her eyes lingered on me with more curiosity than Daniel wanted. "That's a careful answer. I've learned careful answers from careful people," I said. Daniel cleared his throat and moved us along. For the next 20 minutes, he introduced me again and again. Each version of me was smaller than the last. My mother still lives in the house where I grew up. My mother taught me the value of sacrifice. My mother never had much, but she gave me everything. People nodded. Some looked touched. Some looked bored. I smiled when necessary and kept my hands folded around my little black purse. But then, near the refreshment table, something happened Daniel did not expect. A woman in a dark green server's jacket stopped so suddenly that the tray in her hands trembled. "Mrs. Parker," I turned. She was in her late 50s now, her hair threaded with gray, her face fuller than I remembered, but I knew her eyes. "Marilyn," I said. Her mouth opened, then closed, and tears shone before she could stop them. "Oh my goodness, it is you." Daniel glanced between us. "You two know each other." Marilyn set the tray down on a nearby stand. "Know her?" She laughed softly, wiping under one eye. "This woman sat with my mother every Tuesday during chemo when I couldn't get off work. She brought soup to our house for 6 straight weeks. I felt my cheeks warm. Your mother was a lovely woman. She said you were an angel in sensible shoes." I laughed. Then a real laugh, and for a moment the ballroom disappeared. I saw a narrow hospital room rain on the windows, a tired daughter trying not to cry in the hallway. Daniel's smile stiffened. "That's very kind. Mom helped many people during her nursing years." Marilyn looked at him with surprise. "Not just nursing years. After. Long after." Before Daniel could respond, a man with a cane approached from the other side of the room. "Eleanor Parker?" he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "I thought that was you." I turned again. "Mr. Jenkins." He took my hand in both of his. "You remember me? You used to complain every time I told you to take your blood pressure medicine." He laughed loudly enough that several people turned. "And you used to threaten to call my daughter if I didn't." "I never threatened. I promised." His smile shook. "You saved me from being a stubborn fool." Daniel shifted beside me. I could feel confusion radiating from him. In his mind, this room belonged to him. These people belonged to his new world. They were supposed to admire his speech, his suit, his carefully arranged humility. Yet here they were, stopping for me, as if I had not entered through the side door of his success, but through the front door of my own life. A few minutes later, a woman from the registration table waved me over. Then an older pastor crossed the room to squeeze my hand. Then a former school secretary embraced me so hard, I nearly lost my balance. Eleanor, I never thanked you properly. Mrs. Parker, you paid for my grandson's asthma inhaler that winter, didn't you? Do you still do those blood pressure checks? Are you the same Eleanor from Birch Lane? Each question came softly privately, but Daniel heard enough. His face changed by degrees. At first he looked confused, then mildly annoyed, then uneasy. Claire noticed too. She touched his sleeve and whispered something I could not hear. Daniel gave a tight nod. He stepped closer to me. "Mom, why don't we find our table in a moment?" I said. The words were simple, but they surprised him. I had not asked permission. Across the ballroom near the stage, I saw a banner that read, "Willow Creek Community Center, Benefit Gala, honoring those who build our future." Those who build our future. I wondered how many futures had been built in rooms Daniel had never entered. Futures built with donated coats, free meals rides to medical appointments, quiet checks, and old women who remembered names. As we moved toward our table, more people glanced at me. Some smiled with recognition. Some whispered. Not unkindly, curiously. Daniel leaned down, his voice low. "I didn't realize you knew so many people here." I looked straight ahead. "No," I said. "You didn't." He waited, perhaps expecting me to explain. I did not. At our table, Claire arranged herself beside Daniel and left the chair on his other side for me, as if placing me where I could be watched. The program card lay on my plate, embossed in gold. Daniel's name appeared under the evening's honorees. Daniel Parker Community Vision Award. I touched the edge of the card. Vision. What a dangerous word for a man who could not see his own mother. Then the lights dimmed, and the MC stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the ballroom. Daniel straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, and prepared to be celebrated. But I had already seen enough faces in that room to understand something he still did not. The crowd he thought he had gathered for himself was not entirely his. And by the end of the night, that would matter more than he could imagine. Dinner began with music soft enough to make every conversation sound expensive. Waiters moved between the tables, carrying plates arranged with more decoration than food. The lights had been lowered until the chandeliers looked like floating stars. On the stage, the MC spoke warmly about generosity vision and the future of Maple Ridge. Every few minutes, Daniel nodded as if each word had been chosen to describe him personally. I sat to his right with Claire on his left. That arrangement was no accident. Claire kept turning slightly toward Daniel, her body angled like a beautiful gate, while Daniel leaned toward the donors at our table and spoke in a voice full of polished humility. "My mother taught me the value of service," he said to a woman from the bank foundation. "We didn't have much growing up, but we had principles." I kept my hands folded in my lap. Principles. The word sounded strange coming from him while the map of Birch Lane still sat in a drawer at my house. A waiter set a plate in front of me and smiled. "Enjoy, Mom." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said automatically. Daniel's head turned toward me, not sharply, just enough. I knew that look. I had seen it in restaurants at holiday dinners in the passenger seat of his car. It was the look that said I had become too familiar with someone he considered invisible. The waiter smiled wider, though. "You're welcome." Across the room, I noticed Marilyn, the server I had recognized earlier, standing near the wall with a tray of water glasses. She looked tired, the way service workers look when their feet hurt, but their smile is still required. When our eyes met, she gave me a small wave. I smiled back. After the first course, Daniel was pulled into conversation with two men from a development firm. Claire joined in, laughing at something that was not particularly funny. I excused myself quietly, and walked toward the refreshment station. Marilyn saw me coming and set down her tray. "Mrs. Parker," she said softly, "I still can't believe you're here." "I could say the same about you," I answered. "How have you been?" She gave me the kind of smile people use when the truth is too heavy for a crowded room. "Working, taking care of my grandson after school, trying to keep my knees from quitting before I do." I touched her arm. "And your daughter? She's better now. Clean 3 years." Marilyn's eyes filled. "You remember when she was using? I remember you were scared." "You came to the house that night," she whispered. "I never forgot that. Nobody else would come. People judged us. But you came." The memory returned with such clarity that the ballroom disappeared for a moment. A small apartment near the railroad tracks. Rain hammering the windows. Marilyn's daughter shaking under a blanket, half ashamed and half furious. Marilyn standing in the kitchen, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I did what anyone should have done," I said. "No," Marilyn said. "You did what most people say they would do." That sentence reached places in me I had kept guarded for years. We spoke for another minute. Nothing dramatic, nothing improper. She told me her mother's old Bible was still on her dresser. I told her I still remembered her mother's peach cobbler. We laughed softly. Then Marilyn squeezed my hand with both of hers. "You look beautiful tonight," she said. Before I could answer, Daniel's voice came from behind me. "Mom." Not loud, not yet. I turned and found him standing a few feet away, his smile fixed in place. Claire was behind him, her lips pressed together. "There you are," Daniel said. "We were wondering where you went. I was talking to Marilyn." His eyes flicked toward her name tag. "Yes, I see that." Marilyn's expression changed. She took a small step back, already sensing that she had become inconvenient. Daniel gave her a professional nod. "Thank you for your help tonight." It was not rude on the surface. That was the trouble with Daniel. His cruelty wore gloves. Marilyn looked down. "Of course, sir." I felt something tighten in my chest. "She isn't help to me," I said quietly. "She's an old friend." Daniel's smile stiffened. "Of course." But he took my elbow, not hard enough for others to gasp, hard enough for me to know I was being moved. "Excuse us," he said. I pulled my arm free before he could guide me away. His eyes flashed. "Mom," he murmured, "not here." Not where he leaned closer. At my event. The words came out before he could soften them. My event, not Willow Creek's, not the community's. His. Marilyn looked stricken. "Mrs. Parker, I should get back." "No," I said gently. "You did nothing wrong." Daniel's face reddened, but he kept his voice low. "Can we please return to the table? I will in a moment." "No, now." There was a small circle forming around us, though no one wanted to admit they were watching. A woman from the table beside us glanced over her champagne glass. Mr. Jenkins, seated not far away, turned his head. The pastor I had greeted earlier looked up from his program. Claire stepped forward with a brittle laugh. "Eleanor Daniel is about to be part of the next presentation. We don't want you getting lost in conversation with staff." Staff. The word landed harder than it should have because I saw Marilyn flinch. I turned to Claire. "Her name is Marilyn." Claire blinked. "I know. I only meant no," I said. "You meant exactly what you said." Daniel's hand came down on my shoulder. This time, there was nothing affectionate in it. "Mom," he said, still smiling for the room, "you're making everyone uncomfortable." I looked around. Were they uncomfortable? Yes, but not because of me. I could feel the air changing, see eyes shifting from my face to Daniel's hand on my shoulder, then to Marilyn standing silent beside the water glasses. "I'm only talking to someone I know," I said. "You're interrupting the flow of the evening." The flow. "This is a formal event," he said, his voice sharpening beneath the smile. "There are expectations." I studied him. Expectations about who I'm allowed to speak with. His jaw tightened. Don't twist my words. I didn't need to twist them. They arrived that way. A few people nearby went still. Daniel noticed. He released my shoulder, then gave a small laugh, meant to repair the moment. My mother has always been spirited. Spirited. Another word meant to shrink me politely. He turned to the banker from our table who had drifted closer. She worked as a nurse for years, so she gets very attached to people. The banker did not smile. I felt heat rise in my face, but my voice remained calm. That is not something to apologize for. Daniel's eyes hardened. No one is apologizing. You are explaining me again. The sentence came out quietly, but it seemed to travel farther than I expected. Claire's head snapped toward me. Marilyn looked at me with tears in her eyes. Mr. Jenkins pushed himself upright with his cane. Daniel leaned close enough that only I was meant to hear, but in a silent room, whispers are never private. Mom, you do not understand this world. These people are donors, board members' partners. This is not one of your little church suppers where everyone wants a story. You need to sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. It was not the first time Daniel had hurt me. It was not the first time he had corrected me, softened me, explained me, hidden me behind language that sounded gentle to strangers. But there, under crystal lights beside a woman who had once cried in my arms with people listening, the words broke something open. You need to sit down. Stop embarrassing yourself. The room seemed to blur at the edges. I thought of Daniel at 6 years old, standing on a kitchen chair, helping me stir pancake batter. I thought of him at 12, crying into my blouse because Thomas had scolded him too harshly. I thought of him at 21, hugging me outside his dorm and saying he would make me proud. And I wondered when my child had learned to look at me like a stain on his sleeve. I could have shouted. I could have slapped him. I could have told everyone about the papers, the map, the pressure, the senior home he had toured without my consent. But I did none of those things. I only looked at him and said, Daniel, I am not embarrassed. His face twitched. I am hurt, I continued. There is a difference. The silence around us deepened. Claire whispered his name, warning him, but Daniel was too angry now to listen. He smiled, but there was panic beneath it. Mom is emotional tonight. Big rooms overwhelm her sometimes. That was when Mr. Jenkins spoke. Didn't look overwhelmed to me. Everyone turned. He stood with one hand on his cane and the other gripping the back of his chair. His voice was not loud, but it was old and clear. She was having a conversation. You are the one making a scene. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. Before he could answer, the banker woman from our table said, I agree. Then the pastor looked at Marilyn and asked, Are you all right? Marilyn nodded, but tears had slipped down her cheeks. The air shifted again more sharply this time. People were no longer looking at me with pity or confusion. They were looking at Daniel with questions. For the first time that evening, my son seemed to realize he was not controlling the room. His smile returned thinner than paper. Let's all take our seats, he said. The program is continuing. No one moved immediately. I did, not because he told me to, but because I chose to. I touched Marilyn's hand once more and whispered, Hold your head up. Then I walked back toward the table with my spine straight and my heart aching in a way no one could see. Behind me, conversations resumed, but they were different now. Lower, sharper, charged with something Daniel could not polish away. When I sat down, he leaned toward me without looking at me. You have no idea what you just did, he said. I stared at the stage as the MC returned to the microphone. No, Daniel, I whispered. I think you have no idea what you just did. And somewhere in the crowd, eyes were still turning toward us. Not toward me. Toward him. The MC's voice filled the ballroom with practiced warmth. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could have your attention once again, we are now approaching one of the most meaningful moments of tonight's program. The conversation softened into silence. Silverware settled against plates. Chairs shifted. Across the room, the servers paused near the walls, trays held carefully at their sides. I saw Marilyn standing beside a pillar, her eyes still red, watching the stage with a kind of nervous concern that made my heart ache. Beside me, Daniel straightened. Claire touched his sleeve and whispered, "Smile." He did. It was remarkable, really, how quickly my son could become presentable again. Minutes earlier, he had spoken to me with barely hidden contempt. Now he sat beneath golden lights with his chin lifted, his expression humble, his hands folded on the table as if he were a man waiting to be blessed. The MC continued. Our next honoree has become one of Maple Ridge's most visible advocates for progress renewal and responsible growth. Through his work in development and community partnerships, he has shown us that the future of a town is built not merely with buildings, but with vision. Applause began at the word vision. Daniel lowered his eyes modestly, then glanced around just enough to absorb it. I looked at the program card on my plate. Daniel Parker Community Vision Award. How strange it felt to watch a man be praised for seeing the future when he could not see the people seated right in front of him. The MC smiled toward our table. Please join me in welcoming this year's recipient of the Community Vision Award, Mr. Daniel Parker. The applause swelled. Daniel stood, buttoned his tuxedo jacket, and leaned down to kiss Claire's cheek. Then, after the smallest hesitation, he touched my shoulder. Not lovingly, for the cameras. A photographer near the stage lifted his camera, and Daniel gave him exactly what he needed, the successful son acknowledging the humble mother. I sat very still. He walked to the stage with confident steps. People clapped as he climbed the stairs. The ballroom lights caught his face, the polished shoes, the expensive watch, the perfect tailoring. He shook the MC's hand, accepted the glass award, and stood behind the microphone. For a few seconds, he said nothing. That was one of Daniel's skills. He knew how to make silence look like emotion. Then he began. "Thank you," he said softly. "This is an incredible honor." A murmur of approval passed through the room. Daniel placed one hand over his heart. "I am deeply grateful to the Willow Creek Board, to our sponsors, to my colleagues, and to everyone here tonight who believes that Maple Ridge deserves a future worthy of its people. Worthy of its people." I wondered if Mrs. Alvarez on Birch Lane was included in that future. I wondered if Mr. Jenkins was. I wondered if Marilyn would still be serving water in ballrooms built where old homes once stood. Daniel spoke smoothly, thanking board members by name. He praised the donors, the committee, the spirit of renewal. He mentioned Willow Creek as a symbol of what community can become when vision meets action. Not what it already was, what it could become. That difference mattered. Then his voice softened. But tonight, he said, I want to speak not as a businessman, but as a son. Claire turned her head slightly toward me. I felt her watching. Daniel looked down at our table, his eyes glistening just enough for the room to notice. My mother is here tonight. Heads turned. Mine remained facing forward. Daniel smiled in my direction, warm and tender for everyone but me. Mom, would you stand for just a moment? My stomach tightened. I did not move immediately. Claire leaned toward me and whispered, Stand, Eleanor. I placed my napkin on the table and rose slowly. The room applauded politely. Some people smiled. Others, the ones who had witnessed the moment with Marilyn, watched more carefully. Daniel continued. My mother, Eleanor Parker, raised me in a little house on Birch Lane. We didn't have much. In fact, there were times we had almost nothing. Almost nothing. The phrase touched an old anger I had spent years refusing to name. We had not been rich. That was true. But Daniel had never gone hungry. He had never gone without winter boots. He had never missed a school trip because I had picked up night shifts and Thomas had taken electrical work on Sundays. We had struggled, yes, but struggle was not the same as emptiness. Daniel's voice thickened. There were nights when my mother would skip dinner so I could eat. The room sighed. I froze. That had never happened. Not once. There were nights when I ate toast because I was too tired to cook for myself after feeding everyone else. There were nights when Thomas and I stretched meals when beans became soup and soup became leftovers. But I had never placed food in front of Daniel while starving dramatically in the corner. He was turning my life into a scene from a campaign commercial. He went on. She worked as a nurse's aide, sometimes cleaning rooms, sometimes doing whatever job she could find, because she believed I was meant for something more than where we came from. My face warmed. Nurse's aide, doing whatever job she could find. I had been a certified nursing assistant before becoming a registered nurse, and I was proud of every step. But the way Daniel said it made my work sound like a pit, from which he had escaped not a calling that had shaped my soul. A few people glanced at me, some with pity, some with admiration, but the pity burned worse. Daniel lifted the award slightly. If there is one thing my mother gave me, it was the hunger to rise, to build, to leave behind limitations and create opportunity. Leave behind limitations. I heard Thomas's voice in my memory, gentle but firm. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of honest work, Ellie, Daniel continued. That is why Willow Creek matters to me. Because places like Willow Creek remind us that people need a hand up, yes, but they also need leaders willing to imagine something better. Something better. Better than blood pressure checks. Better than free lunches. Better than checkers in a warm room. Better than widows finding company on a Friday night. Better than us. I realized then that the speech was not truly about honoring me. It was about using me. He had made me stand so I could become the living proof of his story, the poor mother, the son who rose the old neighborhood that needed rescuing from itself. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from recognition. Daniel smiled at me again. Mom, thank you for teaching me that we should never be satisfied with simply surviving. Something inside me refused to stay seated in that lie. My voice was not loud when I spoke, but the microphone carried silence back to me. Daniel, I said. He paused. Every face turned. I stood beside my chair, my blue dress plain beneath the chandeliers, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. That is not what I taught you, I said. The ballroom went completely still. Daniel's smile held, but only by force. Mom, we'll talk after. No, I said, still calm. You said I taught you not to be satisfied with surviving. That is not true. I taught you that surviving with dignity is nothing to be ashamed of. A murmur moved through the room. Claire's hand closed around the edge of the table. Daniel's eyes hardened. Mom, and I never skipped dinner so you could eat, I continued. Your father and I worked hard, but we fed you. We loved you. We did not raise you on shame. The words seemed to hang beneath the chandeliers. For 1 second, I saw the boy in him. I saw shock, not anger. A child caught lying. Then pride swallowed him whole. Daniel leaned toward the microphone, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It was still controlled, but a sharp edge ran beneath it. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. My blood went cold. My mother is getting older, he said, with a small, sorrowful smile. And sometimes she remembers things in a way that feels true to her. The room shifted. He went on, encouraged by the terrible sound of his own authority. She has been under some stress lately. We've been having conversations as a family about her care, her living situation, and what is best for her future. Care, living situation, best for her future. He was not just dismissing me. He was laying groundwork. I gripped the back of my chair. Daniel, I said, do not do this. But now he was looking at the crowd, not at me. She is a proud woman, he said gently, and I love her for that. But pride can make it difficult to accept help. So, if she says anything confusing tonight, please understand it comes from emotion, not reality. A sound left my chest before I could stop it. Not a sob, not a gasp. Something smaller, something broken. He had taken the room where I stood the people I had served the place Thomas had asked me to protect, and tried to make me unreliable inside it. An old, confused mother. A woman whose words did not need to count. Claire looked down at her lap. Marilyn covered her mouth. Mr. Jenkins pushed his chair back his cane, knocking against the table leg. Daniel lifted one hand toward me as if blessing me with patience. Mom, he said into the microphone, please sit down before you embarrass yourself further. The whole ballroom seemed to stop breathing. There are humiliations that burn the face, and there are humiliations that clear the eyes. This one cleared mine. I looked at my son on that stage, standing behind a microphone holding an award paid for by generosity he did not understand, and I finally saw the truth plainly. He was not afraid I was confused. He was afraid I would be believed. And judging by the faces turning slowly toward him, he had made the worst mistake of his life. For a moment after Daniel said those words, no one moved. Not the servers, not the donors, not the board members seated beneath the stage lights. Even the MC stood frozen beside the podium, one hand still resting on the edge of the program folder, his smile gone stiff with uncertainty. My son had expected silence to protect him. He had expected people to lower their eyes, feel sorry for the aging mother, and let the successful man gently take control of the narrative. But silence is not always agreement. Sometimes silence is a room deciding what it has just witnessed. I remained standing beside my chair, my fingers resting against the white tablecloth. My knees trembled, but my voice inside was strangely calm. Daniel's face looked down at me from the stage, softened into that public expression of concern, but his eyes were hard. They were telling me to obey, to sit, to disappear back into the shape he had chosen for me. Then a chair scraped against the floor. The sound was small, but in that ballroom, it cracked like thunder. Mr. Jenkins stood slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. He was 82, with a narrow frame and a face carved by years of weather and stubbornness. I had checked his blood pressure more times than I could count. I had driven him home after a dizzy spell once scolded him for skipping medication and brought him chicken soup the winter after his wife died. He looked up at Daniel and said, "Young man, I don't know what kind of story you're trying to sell here, but I know Eleanor Parker. And if she says something happened, I'd trust her memory before I'd trust your microphone." A murmur ran through the room. Daniel blinked, clearly unprepared for anyone to challenge him. "Mr. Jenkins, I appreciate—" No, Mr. Jenkins interrupted. "You don't appreciate anything, not from where I'm standing." Claire's face went pale. Mr. Jenkins turned slightly toward the crowd. "I had a stroke 11 years ago. Couldn't get to appointments. Couldn't afford half the medication they wanted me on. This woman came to my house twice a week after her own shifts checked on me called. The pharmacy argued with my doctor when I was too proud to admit I was confused. I'm alive because she didn't treat old people like problems to manage." A low sound of agreement moved across the ballroom. My throat tightened. "Mr. Jenkins," I whispered, but he only lifted his hand as if to say, "Let me finish." Then another chair moved. A woman in a navy dress stood near the center of the room. I recognized her slowly, Linda Harris, a retired elementary school teacher. She had been younger the last time I saw her often, her hair dark, then her back straighter. Now silver framed her face, and tears shone behind her glasses. "My daughter was 8 when she got pneumonia," Linda said. "My husband had just left. I was working 2 jobs and still couldn't cover the medicine. I never knew who paid the bill at Patterson's pharmacy until years later when the pharmacist slipped and said Mrs. Parker already handled it. She looked at me with trembling affection. Eleanor didn't ask for thanks. She didn't ask to be seen. She just made sure my little girl could breathe. Someone gasped softly. Daniel shifted behind the podium. "These are very touching stories," he said, trying to reclaim the tone, "and of course, my mother has always had a generous heart." "Then why did you speak to her, like she was a burden?" The question came from the banker woman at our table. Her voice was measured, elegant, and devastating. Daniel's mouth closed. She stood smoothing her black dress. "I watched you grip her shoulder earlier when she was speaking to a server. I heard you tell her she did not understand this world, and now you are standing on a stage asking us to believe she is confused because she corrected a lie in your speech." The room grew quieter, sharper. "That does not look like concern to me," the woman continued. "It looks like control." My breath caught. Control. The word named something I had felt for years, but had never spoken aloud in that way. Daniel laughed once lightly, but it died quickly. "I think emotions are running high." A voice from the back called out. "They should be." Heads turned. Marilyn stood near the service entrance, one hand pressed to her apron, her face wet with tears. A supervisor beside her looked alarmed, but Marilyn stepped forward anyway. "I'm staff," she said, and her voice shook at first. Then it strengthened. "So maybe I'm not supposed to speak, but Mrs. Parker has never treated me like I was beneath anyone in this room." She looked directly at Claire, then at Daniel. "My mother had cancer. I was cleaning houses, raising my daughter, trying to keep the lights on. Mrs. Parker sat with my mom when I couldn't. She washed her hair. She rubbed lotion on her hands. She sang hymns with her when the pain got bad. And after my mother passed, Mrs. Parker came to the funeral and sat in the back because she didn't want attention." Marilyn's voice broke. "You stood up there and said she taught you to leave limitations behind, but she never left people behind. That's the difference." A few people began clapping, not loud at first. Just a few palms meeting, hesitant and emotional. Then more joined. The applause was not the polished applause Daniel had received earlier. This was uneven human rising from the chest. Daniel's face changed. The confidence drained from it drop by drop. The MC stepped toward the microphone, perhaps to calm things down, but before he could speak, a man in a gray suit stood from one of the front tables. Dr. Raymond Miller. I had not recognized him at first because he had lost weight and grown a white beard. He had once run the emergency clinic where I worked weekend shifts. He did not look at me immediately. He looked at Daniel. "I was a physician in this town for 40 years, he said, "and I can tell you something about your mother that you apparently never learned. Skill is useful. Money is useful. But steadiness in a crisis, that is rare. Eleanor had that. She could walk into a room where everyone else was panicking and make people feel they might survive the next 10 minutes. He turned to the crowd. "During the blizzard of 2008, my wife had a cardiac episode at home. Ambulances were delayed. Roads were nearly impassable. Eleanor heard the scanner call because she still kept one from her hospital days. She drove through snow in that old Buick of hers, got to my house before the medics, and kept my wife conscious until help arrived." He paused, and when he looked at me, his eyes were wet. "My wife lived another 6 years because of that night. 6 years with me. 6 years with our grandchildren. You cannot put that on a donor plaque." The applause returned stronger now. I stood in the middle of it, feeling almost detached from my own body. Not proud exactly, not triumphant, more like a woman watching old seeds break through soil after years of thinking they had died unseen. Daniel lifted his hand. "Please," he said, "I never meant to disrespect my mother." But the words sounded weak now, because everyone had already heard him. A retired pastor stood next. Intent does not erase impact, son. Then a woman from the Willow Creek Senior Lunch Program rose with a trembling hand. "She paid for the kitchen repairs when the stove broke. Another voice. She helped my brother get into rehab. Another. She sat with my father when hospice couldn't send anyone. Another. She gave me gas money for job interviews and told me not to quit. They did not all stand at once. That would have been too neat, too much like a movie. They rose one by one, awkwardly, emotionally, some embarrassed to speak in public, some angry enough not to care. The stories were not grand speeches. They were fragments of lives. A prescription, a meal, a ride, a phone call, a hand held in a waiting room. And with each memory, Daniel became smaller on that stage. Not because I made him small, because the truth made his performance impossible. Claire kept whispering to him, but he no longer seemed to hear her. His eyes darted across the room, searching for allies. The donors who had smiled at him earlier now looked down at their tables or stared at him with open disapproval. The development men stood stiffly near the back wall, their faces unreadable. The photographers had stopped taking flattering pictures. Then Mr. Jenkins spoke again. "You called her confused," he said. "But from where I'm sitting, she seems to be the only one in your family who remembers what community means." This time, the applause came like a wave. People stood, not everyone, not at first, but enough. Linda Harris rose. Marilyn rose. Dr. Miller rose. The banker woman rose. The pastor rose. A few Willow Creek board members rose with visible discomfort, then conviction. Chairs scraped all across the ballroom as people turned away from the stage and toward me. I wanted to sit down. I wanted to disappear, but not the way Daniel had wanted me to disappear. I wanted to hide, because being loved publicly can feel almost as overwhelming as being shamed publicly when you have spent years convincing yourself you needed nothing. I pressed my hand to my chest. Daniel stared at the crowd as if it had betrayed him. But the crowd had not betrayed him. It had simply recognized me. And for the first time that night, my son was forced to stand in a room where his version of me was no longer the one people believed. The applause did not end quickly. It rose and fell in uneven waves, passing from table to table, from the donors in their black gowns to the servers standing along the walls, from people who knew my name to people who had only learned it minutes ago. I stood beside my chair, with one hand pressed against my chest, feeling as if the whole room had turned into a living thing, breathing around me. Daniel remained on the stage. The glass award in his hand caught the light, throwing small, bright fragments across the podium. He looked trapped inside his own ceremony. Every skill he had relied on his charm, his timing, his polished voice seemed suddenly useless. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. He glanced at the MC, then at Claire, then at the crowd that had begun to stand for the woman he had just tried to dismiss. Claire sat rigid beside my empty chair, her lips pale, her diamonds trembling slightly at her throat. The MC stepped toward the microphone, clearly trying to regain control of the evening. He was a kind man named Peter Lawson, a local radio host who had volunteered at Willow Creek fundraisers for years. His smile had vanished, replaced by the strained expression of someone holding a glass bowl and realizing it had already cracked. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is certainly a deeply emotional moment." But before he could say more, a woman at the front table stood. She was tall, with dark skin, short silver hair, and a red shawl draped over her shoulders. I knew her well. Her name was Denise Whitaker, Executive Director of Willow Creek Community Center. She had been with the center for 14 years, fighting one budget crisis after another, with little more than stubborn faith and a phone list full of people who never had enough but gave anyway. Denise did not look at Daniel first. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the one thing I had hoped to avoid all evening. Recognition. Not casual recognition. Not the surprised delight of old patients and neighbors. This was deeper. This was the look of a woman carrying a secret she had finally decided had become too heavy to keep. My stomach sank. Peter Denise said quietly, "May I speak?" The MC looked relieved to hand the moment to someone else. Of course, Denise. Daniel stiffened. Denise walked to the stage slowly, not dramatically. She moved like a woman who had spent years walking into hard rooms with bad news and still refusing to bend. When she reached the microphone, Daniel stepped aside, though not far. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see it from my table. Denise placed both hands on the podium. I had not planned to say this tonight, she said. A hush settled over the ballroom again. In fact, I was specifically asked not to say it, for years. My heart began to pound. No, Denise, I thought. Please don't. She looked toward me and her face softened. But sometimes humility protects the wrong person, and tonight silence would protect cruelty. Daniel turned his head sharply. Denise continued. Many of you know that Willow Creek Community Center nearly closed its doors 9 years ago. We were behind on the mortgage. The furnace had failed. The senior lunch program was days from shutting down. Our after-school tutoring program had lost its grant. I had begun drafting notices to families telling them we were sorry, but we could not keep going. People around the room nodded. Some remembered. Others leaned forward. At that time, Denise said a donation came through an attorney. A very large donation. Enough to cover the mortgage repair, the building, restore the senior meals, and keep our doors open through the worst financial season we had ever faced. Daniel's expression changed, just slightly. Confusion entered first, then suspicion. Denise kept speaking. That donation came with 2 conditions. First, the donor's name was not to be placed on any wall plaque program or public announcement. Second, the money was to be used to preserve Willow Creek as a place for ordinary people, seniors, children, working families, widows, veterans, and anyone who needed help without being made to feel ashamed. My hand gripped the back of the chair. The room seemed to tilt. I could feel eyes turning toward me before Denise even said my name. For years, Denise said, her voice thickening, we honored that request. We called the donor simply the Eleanor Parker Trust. The sound that moved through the ballroom was not applause. Not yet. It was shock. A collective intake of breath. A shifting of bodies. 100 minds trying to connect the old woman in the blue dress with the invisible hand that had kept a community alive. Daniel stared at Denise. Claire's head turned slowly toward me. I closed my eyes. There it was. The secret Thomas and I had never wanted displayed. The quiet work, the anonymous checks, the help given through Samuel Brooks' office because I did not want gratitude to become a burden. I had wanted people to feel saved by community, not indebted to me. Denise looked directly at Daniel then. Mr. Parker, you stand here tonight accepting an award for community vision. But the community you are speaking about did not survive because of polished speeches or redevelopment language. It survived because your mother believed people should not have to become profitable before they were considered worthy. A few people clapped once sharply, then stopped waiting. Daniel stepped toward the microphone. Denise, I don't think this is the appropriate time. No, she said. It is exactly the appropriate time. A ripple of approval moved through the room. Daniel's face flushed. Denise turned back to the crowd. The Eleanor Parker Trust paid for our furnace. It restored the kitchen. It funded transportation for seniors who could not drive. It covered emergency utilities for families referred through our office. And yes, it helped us resist early pressure to sell the building when certain developers began showing interest in this part of town. The last sentence landed like a match near dry leaves. I saw one of the development men near the back look down. Daniel's hand tightened around the award. The MC looked stunned. The Willow Creek board members whispered among themselves. Some of them had known pieces of this, but not all of it. Not the whole shape of the thing. Denise continued gentler now. Eleanor did not ask to be honored. She did not ask to be introduced. She never once attended a board meeting demanding credit. When I begged her to let us name the senior lunchroom after Thomas, she told me feed people there. That will be name enough. My eyes filled. I could hear Thomas saying it. I could see him in our kitchen sorting bills, setting aside money for someone else even when we had repairs of our own waiting. Daniel looked at me then. For the first time all night really looked. His face had lost its anger. In its place was something almost childlike disbelief, embarrassment, fear. He was seeing not only that I had money, but that I had a life outside his understanding. A life of choices, influence, love, quiet authority. A life he had dismissed because it did not come wrapped in wealth he recognized. The banker woman at my table whispered, "My God." Mr. Jenkins said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "That old Buick saved more people than his Mercedes ever did." A few people laughed through tears. Daniel did not. He stepped to the microphone again, his voice strained. "Mom, is this true?" Such a small question. Such a late one. I looked up at him. My son. My baby. The man who had tried to make me seem confused because he could not bear to be contradicted. "Yes," I said. "It's true." The microphone did not carry my voice, but the front tables heard me. The words spread in whispers behind raised hands. "It's true. It's true. It's true." Daniel swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was almost tender, and because of that it hurt more. I answered without raising my voice. "You stopped asking who I was a long time ago." The ballroom went silent again. Daniel flinched as if I had slapped him. Denise stepped back from the podium, giving the room space to absorb what had been revealed. The glass award in Daniel's hand looked suddenly ridiculous. Community vision. What did vision mean if a man could not see the woman who had carried him? Then from somewhere near the back, someone began clapping. It was Marilyn. Her hands came together slowly, deliberately, tears still on her face. Mr. Jenkins joined. Linda Harris joined. Dr. Miller joined. The pastor joined. Then the servers. Then the donors. Then whole tables rose again, not in polite recognition, but in gratitude. This time, the applause was not defending me from Daniel. It was honoring what had been hidden. I did not know what to do with it. I had spent so many years giving in quiet corners that being seen felt almost like standing in bright sunlight after a long illness. Part of me wanted to shrink. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted Thomas beside me so I could say, "Look what they did with what you left. Look how many people stayed standing." On stage, Daniel did not clap. He simply stood there holding an award that no longer felt like his. And in that moment, the deepest reversal of the night became clear to everyone in the room. My son had tried to use me as proof of how far he had risen. Instead, the crowd had just learned that the very ground beneath his honor had been held up by the mother he was ashamed of. The applause faded slowly, but the truth it had uncovered did not fade with it. It remained in the ballroom like smoke after a fire, touching every table, every face, every polished glass and folded napkin. People were still standing, some wiping their eyes, some whispering to one another, some staring at Daniel as if they were seeing him through a different lens now. My son stood on the stage with the glass award in his hand and the microphone in front of him, but for the first time that evening, he looked less like a man being honored and more like a boy caught in a story bigger than himself. Why didn't you tell me? He had asked. That question stayed between us. There were many answers. Because you stopped visiting without a purpose. Because every time I tried to speak, you corrected the shape of my words. Because you had no room in your life for anything about me that did not serve your image. Because some gifts are not given to be used later as proof. But the answer I gave him had already been enough. You stopped asking who I was a long time ago. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. Claire rose halfway from her chair, then sat back down as if she could not decide whether to rescue him or distance herself from him. The MC stood off to the side, helpless. Denise remained near the podium, her shoulders straight, her face solemn. Then a man near the front table stood. At first, I did not recognize him. He was in his 70s, tall and narrow, with thick glasses and a gray suit that looked slightly too large for him. He held a folded program in one hand and leaned toward the aisle as if debating whether he had the right to speak. Then he said, "Eleanor." My heart gave a sharp little jump. "Samuel," I whispered. "Samuel Brooks, my attorney, Thomas's old friend. The man who had helped me set up the trust, send the donations, keep my name out of places where people might try to turn gratitude into performance. He had known me before my hair turned gray, before grief softened my voice, before Daniel began measuring people by the cost of their watches. Samuel looked toward me, asking permission without words. I shook my head once. "Please don't." But he looked at Daniel, then at the award in Daniel's hand, then at the crowd that had just watched my son call me confused. His face changed. Samuel Brooks had spent 45 years practicing law in a town where men underestimated quiet women every day. He had a patient face, but not a weak one. He stepped into the aisle. "I need to say something," he said. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Brooks, this is a private family matter." Samuel looked at him over the top of his glasses. "You made it public when you took a microphone." A low murmur passed through the room. Daniel swallowed. Samuel continued. "And since you questioned your mother's memory in front of this entire room, I believe the room deserves to know how accurate her memory has been when it mattered most." My stomach twisted. I gripped the chair in front of me. There was one secret beyond Willow Creek that Daniel did not know. One I had protected not only from the town, but from him. A secret Thomas and I had agreed would remain hidden because we believed a son should not feel indebted to his parents for being loved. Samuel turned toward me again. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said softly. I closed my eyes, and I knew he was going to tell it. Daniel set the award on the podium with a dull sound. "Tell what?" Samuel took a slow breath. 7 years ago, he said Parker Development Group was not the success story people now believe it to be. Daniel went still. Claire's head snapped toward him. Samuel continued, the company had overextended itself on 2 commercial properties outside Columbus. A lender was preparing to call a major note. Several subcontractors had not been paid on schedule. There was a serious risk of bankruptcy. The room became so quiet I could hear someone's bracelet slide against a water glass. Daniel's face drained of color. "That's confidential," he said. Samuel nodded. "It was, and I am not revealing client information. I was not your attorney." Daniel looked confused, then alarmed. Samuel turned slightly toward the audience. At that time, a private investment came into the company through an intermediary. The funds stabilized the lender relationship, satisfied several outstanding obligations, and allowed Parker Development Group to survive long enough to restructure. Daniel's mouth opened. No sound came out. I remembered that season too well. Daniel had not called me often then, but when he did, I could hear the strain behind his confidence. He had said business was complicated. He had said cash flow was temporarily tight. He had said Claire was stressed, but everything was under control. He had not asked for help. Pride would not allow it. But I was his mother. Mothers hear the unpaid bill in a son's voice. We hear the fear beneath the words, fine. I had called Samuel the next morning. "Find out what is happening," I had said. He did, and what he found had terrified me. Daniel's company was closer to collapse than he would ever admit. If it failed, it would not only bruise his ego. Families of workers and small contractors would suffer too. Men with children, women with mortgages, people whose names Daniel probably did not remember, but whose lives were tied to his decisions. I had sat in Thomas's chair that night with the financial statement Samuel brought me and cried until my chest hurt. Not because of the money, because I realized my son was drowning in front of me and would rather sink than let his mother see him wet. So I used what Thomas had left. I used part of the insurance. I sold a modest investment we had held for years. I allowed Samuel to arrange the funds through a private holding structure so Daniel would never know the source. It was not a gift to his pride. It was a rescue of his future. Samuel's voice brought me back to the ballroom. That intermediary, he said, was funded by Eleanor Parker. A sound moved through the crowd. This one was different from the others. Not shock alone, something heavier. A collective realization that the story had deeper roots than even the Willow Creek revelation had shown. Daniel stared at me. "No," he said. It was not anger at first. It was refusal. "No," he repeated quieter. "That's not possible." Samuel looked at him sadly. "It is." Daniel stepped down from the podium as if the stage had become unstable. "I built that company." "You did work," Samuel said. "No one is saying you didn't. I built it," Daniel insisted, his voice rising. "I took the risks. I made the deals. I turned it around." "Yes," Samuel said, "after your mother made sure there was still something left to turn around." Claire stood fully now. Daniel. He did not look at her. His eyes were locked on me, full of humiliation, disbelief, and something that looked almost like betrayal. That wounded me more than I expected. He looked betrayed because I had saved him without permission, because I had kept his pride alive so carefully that he had mistaken it for independence. "You knew," he asked me. I nodded. "All this time, yes." His voice cracked. "And you let me think I did it alone. I let you stand," I said. "There's a difference." He flinched. I stepped into the aisle. My legs were not steady, but my voice was. "When you were little, Daniel, you fell off your bicycle in the driveway. You scraped both knees and cried so hard, I thought you had broken something. Your father wanted to run to you, but I stopped him for 1 second. I said, 'Let him try to get up.' And you did. You got up bleeding and furious and rode that bicycle again." Daniel's eyes glistened. "I have been doing some version of that your whole life," I continued. "Helping enough so you could rise. Staying back enough so you could believe your legs were your own." The room was silent. "But somewhere along the way, I said you confused being allowed to stand with standing alone." Daniel looked down. I had not wanted this truth told. Not like this. Not in a ballroom full of strangers and donors and cameras. But now that it was spoken, I realized how heavy it had been to carry. All those years of listening to Daniel brag about being self-made. All those lunches where he talked down to me about money. All those times he treated my old car and old house as evidence of ignorance while his company, the company that gave him the power to judge Mahad, survived because of money from the very life he mocked. It would have been easy in that moment to feel triumph. I did not. I felt grief, because the crowd had turned against Daniel, yes, but I was still his mother. And watching your child be stripped of illusion is not satisfying when you remember the child he used to be. Daniel finally whispered, "Why the word was so small?" Not why didn't you tell me, not why embarrass me, just why. I answered with the oldest truth I had. "Because I loved you." His face twisted. "And because your father would have wanted me to help you, not for applause, not for ownership, not so you would owe me, just because you were our son." For the first time that night, Daniel looked truly ashamed. Not angry, not exposed, ashamed. The kind of shame that does not come from being caught, but from finally seeing what you have stepped on. He turned away from the microphone, away from the crowd, away from the award. His shoulders sagged beneath the perfect tuxedo. Claire reached for his arm, but he did not respond. Samuel sat down slowly. Denise lowered her eyes. And I stood beneath those chandeliers, feeling the terrible cost of truth. My son had wanted the world to see me as a confused old woman. Instead, the world had just learned that I had been the silent hand beneath his success. But the victory hurt, because beneath the applause, beneath the justice, beneath the crowds turning, there was one unbearable fact. The man I had saved was the same man who had tried to erase me. After Samuel sat down, the ballroom felt different. Not louder, not quieter, different. The kind of different that happens when people realize they are no longer attending the event they thought they were attending. The gala had begun as a celebration, then become a defense of my dignity, and now it had turned into something more dangerous for Daniel. It had become a room full of witnesses. Daniel stood at the edge of the stage, no longer behind the microphone, no longer protected by the podium. The glass award sat abandoned beside the floral arrangement shining under the lights, as if it belonged to someone else. His face had gone pale, but his eyes were moving quickly, measuring exits, alliances, damage. That was when Councilwoman Patricia Reed stood from a table near the front. I knew Patricia, though not well. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, with short brown hair, and a habit of asking questions people hoped she had forgotten. She had served on the Maple Ridge Town Council for nearly 12 years and had built a reputation for reading every line of every proposal before voting on anything. Daniel saw her rise, and something in his expression tightened. Daniel, Patricia said, her voice calm enough to be frightening since we are discussing community vision tonight. Perhaps this is the right moment to clarify something. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Daniel forced a smile. Councilwoman Reed, I don't think this is the proper forum. Patricia looked around the ballroom. A public gala where you are receiving a community award while promoting yourself as a leader in local renewal seems like a very proper forum. A few people murmured agreement. Daniel's jaw worked once. I'm happy to schedule a meeting. I'm sure you are, Patricia said. But I have asked for meetings before. Your office keeps sending summaries instead of answers. The development men near the back shifted uncomfortably. I felt a coldness move through me. I knew what was coming before she said it. The map on my kitchen table seemed to appear in my mind again. Birch Lane in blue, the grocery property in Green Willow Creek circled in red. Patricia lifted a folder from her table. I received a preliminary redevelopment packet last week, she said. Not officially submitted for full council review yet, but circulated quietly among certain stakeholders. It describes a proposed mixed-use development on the East Side Corridor, luxury apartments, boutique retail, medical offices, parking expansion. A very polished proposal. Daniel's lips flattened. That project is conceptual. Conceptual, Patricia repeated. Interesting word, because some residents have already reported receiving letters about potential buyouts. Mr. Jenkins turned sharply toward the stage. A woman from the senior lunch program whispered, "Buyouts." Patricia continued. Several homes on Birch Lane and Hawthorne Avenue appear marked for acquisition. Some of those homes belong to elderly residents. Some belong to widows. Some belong to people who have lived there for 40 or 50 years. I felt every eye in the room shift not to me this time, but toward the neighborhood Daniel had called an opportunity. Daniel raised both hands slightly. No one is forcing anyone to sell. Not yet, Patricia said. The words landed hard. She opened the folder. But there is language in this packet suggesting that if voluntary purchase targets are not met, your development partners may seek zoning changes and blight designations to increase pressure on remaining properties. A sharper murmur moved through the ballroom. Blight. That word was uglier than all the polished ones Daniel had used before. Logistics, vision, renewal, opportunity. Blight stripped a home of memory and turned it into a problem on paper. Mr. Jenkins slammed his cane once against the floor. My house is not blight. People turned toward him. He stood again, trembling with anger now. My wife planted roses in that yard. My grandson learned to ride a bike on that sidewalk. You think because the porch needs paint you can call it blight. Daniel looked cornered. Mr. Jenkins, no one is talking about your home specifically. Patricia looked down at the folder. Actually, his address is listed. The room erupted, not with shouting all at once, but with disbelief breaking into words. That's shameful. Who else is listed? Did the board know what about Willow Creek? At the mention of Willow Creek, Denise's face hardened. Patricia turned a page. The packet does not state that Willow Creek Community Center will be demolished. However, the property is identified as strategically significant for future phase evaluation. Denise stepped forward. Future phase evaluation. Daniel shook his head quickly. That is standard planning language. Standard language for what Denise asked. Waiting until people stop paying attention, Daniel's face flushed. That is unfair, no, she said. Unfair is accepting applause for supporting a community center while your partners study how to absorb the land around it. The donors began whispering among themselves. The banker woman at my table had taken out her phone and was typing with quick, precise movements. A man from one of the local foundations stood and walked toward the back of the room, speaking urgently into his cell. Claire leaned toward Daniel from below the stage. Fix this, she whispered, but there was no fixing it. Not now. Patricia looked at me then, and I saw sympathy in her eyes before she returned to Daniel. Mrs. Parker, did your son approach you about selling your home? Every muscle in my body went still. Daniel spoke before I could. My mother and I had a private family conversation about her safety and future care. Patricia's eyes narrowed. That is not what I asked. I took a breath. The whole room waited. Yes, I said. He brought papers to my house. Daniel's head snapped toward me. I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a folder, property estimates, senior living information, a page marked where I was supposed to sign. A sound of disgust came from somewhere near the front. Daniel stepped down from the stage. Mom, that is a gross mischaracterization. I turned to him, then characterize it truthfully. His mouth opened. Nothing came. I reached into my purse. The night before, after staring at that map until my eyes burned, I had folded the loose page and slipped it into the inside pocket of my handbag. I had not known why. Perhaps some part of me understood that truth sometimes needs paper in a world that dismisses old women's memories. I unfolded it slowly. This was left on my kitchen table. I said. Patricia walked toward me and took it gently. Her eyes scanned the page. Then her face changed. She turned it outwards enough for the front tables to see. Birch Lane is marked, she said. The grocery property is marked. Willow Creek is circled. Denise pressed a hand over her mouth. Daniel's voice rose. That document is preliminary and internal. Internal to whom, Patricia asked. He did not answer. The development men at the back started moving toward the exit. The banker woman spoke loudly from our table. For the record, the Maple Ridge Community Bank Foundation will be pausing any pending sponsorship discussions with Parker Development Group until this is reviewed. Daniel turned to her. Elaine, let's not overreact. She looked at him with cold disappointment. You tried to declare your mother unreliable in a room full of people who knew better. I don't think I'm the one overreacting. Another donor stood. The Langley Family Fund is withdrawing its pledge from tonight's joint redevelopment initiative until we receive full transparency. A third voice. Same for us. Then another. One by one, the polished alliances Daniel had counted on began slipping from his hands. The MC looked overwhelmed. Someone from the hotel staff moved near the stage, uncertain whether security might be needed. Claire stood frozen, her carefully arranged face collapsing into panic and anger. Daniel looked around the room, trying to find one person willing to rescue him. No one did. That was when he finally turned to Minot with apology but with accusation. "Are you happy now?" he asked. The question struck me harder than all the public words before it. Happy. As if a mother could feel happiness watching her son's reputation crumble beneath the weight of his own choices. I stood slowly. "No, Daniel," I said. "I am not happy." The room quieted. "I am heartbroken." His face flickered. "But heartbreak is not the same as guilt," I continued. "And I will not carry guilt for telling the truth about something you chose to do." He looked away. Patricia folded the map and placed it inside her folder. "This proposal will be reviewed publicly," she said. "Fully. Every address, every investor, every conflict of interest." Daniel's shoulders sank. The applause did not come this time. This moment was too serious for applause. What filled the ballroom instead was something heavier: accountability. The sound of people waking up. The sound of charm losing to evidence. The sound of an entire crowd understanding that my son had not only tried to shame his mother, he had tried to profit from the silence of people he thought were too old, too poor, or too polite to fight back. And now at last, they were no longer silent. There are moments in life when anger rises so fast it feels like fire. That night, standing in the Ridgeview Grand Ballroom, I had every reason to let it burn. My son had mocked me in public. He had called my memory unreliable. He had used my grief, my poverty, my marriage, my nursing years, and my old house as props in a story built to lift himself higher. Then when the truth began to tear through that story, he had looked at me and asked if I was happy. As if I had come there to destroy him. As if I had ever wanted anything except for him to remember how to be human. The room was still watching us. Councilwoman Reed held the map. Denise stood near the stage with her hands clasped tightly. Samuel Brooks sat with his head bowed. Donors whispered. Servers stood motionless along the wall. Claire's eyes darted from Daniel to the exit as though she could measure the social damage by the number of people still staring. Daniel stood a few feet from me now, no podium between us. Without the stage lights making him larger, he looked almost ordinary. A man in an expensive tuxedo, pale with humiliation, holding himself together with pride that had begun to crack. I could have exposed him further. I could have told the room about every phone call he ignored, every dinner where he corrected me every time he made my old age sound like a problem to be solved. I could have described Claire's cold little compliments, the senior living brochures, the way he kissed my cheek, only when cameras were nearby. But something in me was tired of proving pain. Pain does not become more real because strangers nod at it. So I stepped into the aisle and looked at the MC. "May I speak?" Peter Lawson seemed startled, then quickly nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Parker." Daniel's eyes widened. "Mom, don't." That word didn't carried years inside it. Don't embarrass me. Don't tell that story. Don't wear that. Don't talk too much. Don't make this emotional. Don't remind people where I came from. For most of my life, I had heard instructions from doctors, supervisors grieving families, frightened patients. I knew the difference between guidance and control. Daniel's don't had never been guidance. It had been a leash. I walked toward the stage. No one clapped. No one spoke. The room made a path for me without being asked. Mr. Jenkins reached out as I passed, and I touched his hand. Marilyn stood near the wall, crying openly now. Denise stepped aside and offered me the microphone. I stood behind it and looked out at all those faces. Then I looked at Daniel. "My son is right about one thing I said." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Daniel looked up sharply. "He is right that I am proud," I continued. "I am proud of the work I did. I am proud of the husband I loved. I am proud of the home we built. I am proud of every patient whose hand I held, every neighbor I fed, every child who walked through Willow Creek's doors and felt safe for an afternoon." My voice trembled, but it did not break. And yes, I am proud of my son. Daniel's face twisted as if those words hurt more than accusation would have. I am proud of the boy he was, I said. The boy who used to save pennies for the animal shelter. The boy who covered me with a blanket after my long shifts. The boy who once cried because he thought a classmate was eating lunch alone. I paused. That boy was real. I will never deny him. The ballroom was silent enough for breath to matter. But love, I said, does not require blindness. Daniel lowered his eyes. I have loved my son through distance, through arrogance, through silence, through being corrected in public and dismissed in private. I have loved him when he forgot my birthday until Claire reminded him with a text. I have loved him when he visited my house, like an inspector instead of a son. I have loved him when he turned his father's sacrifices into a speech, but treated his father's old neighborhood like land waiting to be cleared. Claire looked down at her lap. Daniel whispered, "Mom." I lifted my hand gently, stopping him. Please, let me finish. He did. That alone told me the room had changed. I will always love you, Daniel, I said, looking directly at him. But I will not confuse love with permission. His eyes shone. I will not give you permission to make me small so you can feel important. I will not give you permission to call me confused when I tell the truth. I will not give you permission to decide where I live, what my home means, or whether my memories are useful enough to keep. I reached into my purse and took out the folded copy of the senior living page he had left with the signature tab. I had brought that too, tucked behind the map, though I had hoped I would never need it. I held it up. You brought these papers to my kitchen table and called it care. It was not care. Care asks, control arranges. A low murmur of agreement moved through the room. I am not selling my house, I said. Not tonight, not next week, not because a developer wants clean lines on a map. Not because my son thinks an old woman belongs somewhere more convenient. Mr. Jenkins nodded, hard tears shining in his eyes. And I will not help you cover what happened here. I continued. Not with silence. Not with money. Not with a mother's instinct to protect her child from consequences he created with his own hands. Daniel looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the blow land. For years, he had counted on one thing more than investors, more than charm, more than business sense. He had counted on my love to keep rescuing him quietly. He had counted on the fact that mothers absorb damage and call it devotion. I had done that for too long. I helped you when your company was failing, I said softly. I did it because I loved you. I would make that choice again for the man I hoped you would become. But I will not use Thomas's legacy, my savings, or my silence to protect a man who harms the very people we spent our lives helping. Daniel's lips trembled. You wanted to be known as a community leader, I said. Then begin with the truth. Apologize to Marilyn. Apologize to Mr. Jenkins. Apologize to Willow Creek. Apologize to every person whose home became a blue mark on your map before they became a human being in your mind. No one moved. And apologize to me, I said, my voice nearly breaking at last. Not because I am powerful tonight. Not because this room turned against you. Apologize because I am your mother, and you forgot that my dignity did not expire when I got old. Daniel covered his mouth with one hand. For a moment, I thought he might walk out. Pride still battled across his face. I could see it. The urge to defend himself, to blame me, to blame emotion, to blame misunderstanding, to blame the crowd for seeing too much. Then his shoulders dropped. He did not come to the microphone. He did not make a grand speech. He simply stood in the aisle, a grown man surrounded by the wreckage of his performance, and whispered, I'm sorry. It was too quiet for most of the room. But I heard it. A mother always hears the first crack in a son's armor. I looked at him and said, "That is a beginning. It is not the repair." His face crumpled. The truth of that sentence was heavier than punishment. It meant I was not closing the door, but I was no longer holding it open with my own body while he walked over me. I turned back to the crowd. "I do not want revenge," I said. "Revenge is too small for what has happened here. I want honesty. I want this redevelopment proposal examined in daylight. I want Willow Creek protected. I want our elders treated as neighbors, not obstacles. And I want every person in this room to remember that old age does not make a person invisible." For the first time since I stepped onto the stage, applause began. It was not explosive. It was solemn, respectful. The kind of applause that does not celebrate a spectacle, but honors a line finally drawn. I stepped away from the microphone. Denise hugged me first, then Marilyn, then Linda Harris. Mr. Jenkins raised his cane slightly like a salute, and through my tears, I almost laughed. Daniel remained where he was. For once, no one rushed to save him from the silence. Not even me. And that more than anything I said was the moment my son understood that the mother he had tried to shame had finally stopped carrying the weight of his pride. I do not remember leaving the stage. That is the strange mercy of painful nights. The mind keeps certain details and lets others fall away. I remember Denise holding my hand. I remember Marilyn wiping her cheeks with a folded napkin. I remember Mr. Jenkins standing near his table with his cane tucked under one arm, looking proud and furious at the same time. But I do not remember the exact moment I stepped down. I only remember that Daniel did not follow me. He remained near the stage, surrounded by people who no longer wanted anything from him. Not promises, not speeches, not photographs. The award he had accepted still sat on the podium, catching the light like something abandoned at a crime scene. The gala did not end all at once. It unraveled. Some donors left quietly, heads bent together in urgent conversation. Others went to Denise and promised their support for Willow Creek directly, without Daniel's name attached. Councilwoman Reed spoke with Samuel near the side of the room, the folded map in her hand. A reporter from the local paper who had been invited to cover the award stood near the back, taking notes with the careful intensity of a woman who knew the story had changed. Claire left before Daniel did. I saw her gather her small silver clutch, whisper something sharp into his ear, and walk toward the exit without looking at me. Her face was pale beneath her makeup. Not sorry, not humbled, embarrassed. There is a difference. Shame mourns the harm done. Embarrassment mourns being seen. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to the room as if he expected someone to tell him what to do. No one did. For years, he had moved through rooms with ease because people wanted access to his confidence. That night, confidence had no currency left. People avoided his eyes. A few shook his hand stiffly, already distancing themselves. One of his development partners walked past him without stopping. That, I think, was when Daniel understood that public disgrace does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives as people deciding not to stand near you. I did not speak to him again that night. Denise offered to drive me home, but I declined. So did Samuel. So did Linda Harris. Even Mr. Jenkins insisted his nephew could take me, though. I reminded him his nephew lived 40 minutes away. I drove myself here, I told them. I can drive myself home. The valet brought my Buick around. The young man with the red jacket stepped out, holding my faded heart key ring carefully in his palm. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than before. "You have a good night, okay?" I almost smiled. "I will try." As I pulled away from the hotel, the ballroom lights shrank in my rearview mirror. Snow had begun to fall, not heavily, just a thin dusting that made the roads shine under the street lamps. The Buick's heater clicked and groaned before warming my feet. For the first time all evening, no one was watching me. I cried then, not loudly, not dramatically. Tears simply slipped down my face while I drove past the dark storefronts, past the pharmacy, past the road that led to Willow Creek. I cried for Thomas, who should have been beside me. I cried for the years I had swallowed small humiliations because they came from my only child. I cried for Daniel, too, for the boy who had once loved without calculation, and the man who had buried that boy beneath ambition. When I reached Birch Lane, the houses were quiet. Mrs. Alvarez's porch light glowed yellow through the snow. Mr. Jenkins's roses, bare for winter, leaned against their trellis like old soldiers. My house stood at the end of the block, white paint-chipped maple tree dark against the sky. For years, I had sometimes come home from Daniel's world feeling smaller than when I left. That night, I came home exhausted, heartbroken, and strangely lighter. Not happy, lighter. The house did not look poor to me when I stepped inside. It looked faithful. The kitchen table was still there. Thomas's boots still stood by the back door. The old clock still ticked above the stove. Nothing had become grander. Nothing had been renovated. Yet somehow the room seemed to have more air. I took off the blue dress carefully and hung it over the chair in my bedroom. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in my slip and cried again, this time into my hands, until there was nothing left but breath. By morning, the story was everywhere. The Maple Ridge Gazette ran a headline that made my stomach tighten. Community gala turns into public reckoning over redevelopment plan. They did not use the worst of Daniel's words, thank God, but they used enough. By noon, people were calling. Some left messages of support. Some apologized for not knowing. Some wanted interviews. I answered almost none of them. I did answer Denise. Willow Creek is safe for now, she told me. Safer than it was yesterday. That is what matters, I said. It is not the only thing that matters, Eleanor. I looked out at the maple tree. Snow clung to its branches. It is the thing I can bear to think about. Over the next few days, consequences came in steady waves. Daniel resigned from the community campaign committee before they could remove him. 2 major sponsors publicly withdrew from his redevelopment initiative. The bank foundation suspended discussions. Councilwoman Reed announced a public review of the entire East Side proposal. The phrase elderly displacement appeared in the newspaper, and once a town starts using honest words, polished language begins to lose its hiding places. Samuel called to tell me not to speak to reporters without him. I don't want to ruin my son, I said. You are not ruining him, Samuel answered. You are refusing to be used as his shield. Claire did not call. Daniel did not call either. For 3 days, I carried that silence around the house like a bowl filled too close to the rim. I told myself I did not expect him to call. I told myself boundaries meant letting silence stay silent. Still, every time the phone rang, my heart moved before my pride could stop it. On the 4th afternoon, I was sitting in Thomas' chair reading the same page of a library book for the 5th time when I heard a car outside. Not the smooth, expensive purr of the Mercedes, an ordinary engine. I pulled back the curtain. A gray rental car sat at the curb. Daniel stepped out. For a moment, I did not recognize him. Not because his face had changed, but because everything around the face had. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, no watch shining at his wrist. He wore jeans, a dark coat, and an old Ohio State sweatshirt I had not seen in years. His hair looked uncombed. His shoulders were rounded as if he had been carrying something too heavy to put down. He stood on the sidewalk for almost a full minute before walking toward the porch. I did not rush to the door. That may sound cruel, but it was not. It was the first time in my life I understood that a mother does not have to run every time her child knocks. Sometimes love opens the door slowly so dignity can enter first. He knocked once, then again. I opened the door. Daniel looked at me, and all the words he had prepared seemed to fall apart. "Mom," he said. I held the door but did not step back. Daniel. His eyes were red. Whether from crying or not sleeping, I did not know. "I'm not here for money," he said quickly. The sentence hurt because it told me he knew what he had become in my eyes. "I didn't ask if you were." He swallowed. "I'm not here about the company, or the house, or the news. Then why are you here?" He looked past me into the front room toward Thomas' chair, toward the old photographs, toward everything he had spent years treating like evidence of a life beneath him. Then he looked back at me. "I want to know the truth," he said. I studied him carefully. "About what?" His face crumpled slightly. "About Dad," he whispered. "About you. About what you sacrificed. About all the things I was too arrogant to ask." The cold air moved between us through the open door. I did not know yet whether this was repentance or desperation. I did not know whether Daniel had come because he loved me or because losing his image had finally forced him to look for something real. Trust once cracked does not mend simply because someone arrives without a suit. But for the first time in years, my son had not come to instruct me. He had come to listen, so I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "But if you want the truth, Daniel, you will sit at my kitchen table and hear all of it." He nodded, tears spilling over at last. "Yes," he said. "All of it." And as he crossed the threshold of the old house he had tried to take from me, I felt Thomas's memory settle gently in the room. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the faintest beginning of something that might one day become repair. Daniel sat at my kitchen table like a man visiting a place he had once owned in his imagination, but never truly understood. The afternoon light came through the yellow curtains, falling across the worn wood between us. I made tea because my hands needed something to do, not because either of us wanted it. Daniel held the mug with both hands and stared at the steam, as if it might tell him where to begin. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was not comfortable, but it was honest. After years of polished conversations, honest silence felt almost holy. Finally, Daniel looked toward the hallway where his childhood photographs still hung. "I forgot that picture was there," he said. I followed his eyes. It was the one from his 6th grade science fair. He had built a model volcano with Thomas, and the kitchen had smelled like vinegar for 2 days. "You were so proud of that volcano," I said. He gave a broken laugh. "Dad let me think I did most of it. You did do most of it. He only fixed the parts that would have fallen apart before you got to school." Daniel lowered his head. "That's what you both did for me, wasn't it?" he whispered. "Fix things behind me so I could walk forward thinking I was stronger than I was." I sat across from him. "We helped you because we loved you. That does not make your strength false, but it does mean you should have learned gratitude, not arrogance." His eyes filled. I know. I waited. I had learned something from years of nursing. People reveal the truth more fully when you do not rush to rescue them from discomfort. Daniel wiped his face with the sleeve of his sweatshirt. "I have replayed that night so many times," he said. "The things I said, the way you looked at me. I keep hearing myself tell you to sit down. I keep seeing Marilyn's face, Mr. Jenkins, everyone." He swallowed hard. "I was ashamed," he said. "Not of you at first, maybe. I think I was ashamed of needing help. Ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed that everything I built still had your fingerprints on it. So I tried to make the past look small. And because you were the one person who remembered it clearly, I made you small too." The words hurt because they were true. He looked at me. "I am sorry, Mom." This time he said it clearly, not whispered beneath pressure, not offered to stop a public disaster. Said in my kitchen with no audience, no award, no cameras, and no one to impress. "I am sorry for humiliating you. I am sorry for calling you confused. I am sorry for trying to make decisions about your home. I am sorry for treating your age like weakness. I am sorry for using Dad's memory while ignoring what he stood for. Tears ran down his face. And I am sorry it took losing everything in public for me to see what I had already lost in private. My own eyes burned. For years, I had imagined Daniel apologizing. In my imagination, forgiveness came quickly, like opening a window. But real forgiveness is more complicated. It sits beside pain. It does not erase memory. It asks, what must change so the same wound is not made again? I forgive you, I said. His face crumpled with relief. But forgiveness is not the same as trust. He nodded immediately, almost desperately. I know. No, I said gently. You need to hear me. I forgive you because I refuse to let bitterness finish what pride started. But I will not return to the way things were. You will not manage me. You will not speak for me. You will not pressure me about this house. And you will not use my love as a safety net every time your ambition sets something on fire. He cried harder then, not dramatically, but like a man whose last defense had finally failed. What do I do? He asked. I looked toward Thomas's boots by the back door. You start by repairing what you damaged. In the weeks that followed, Daniel did not fix everything. No one does. But for the first time in years, he stopped trying to appear changed and began doing the uglier work of changing. He issued a public apology to Willow Creek, to Marilyn, to Mr. Jenkins, to the residents of Birch Lane and Hawthorne Avenue, and to me. Samuel helped make sure it was not vague. I refused to let him hide behind phrases like miscommunication or unintended offense. The apology named what he had done: disrespect, pressure, arrogance, and harm. He withdrew Parker Development Group from the East Side proposal. That decision cost him. 2 partners left. Claire moved out within a month, telling mutual friends she needed distance from the scandal. Daniel did not chase her. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe he finally understood that a marriage built on image could not survive the loss of one. Councilwoman Reed created a public review committee for senior housing protections. Daniel showed up to the meetings. At first, people glared at him. Mr. Jenkins refused to shake his hand for 3 months. Marilyn would not speak to him beyond polite necessity, but Daniel kept coming. He listened. He took notes. He used his knowledge of real estate to help draft protections against predatory buyouts. When he tried to sound important, Patricia Reed stopped him with one raised eyebrow. He learned, slowly. A year later, Willow Creek held its annual senior luncheon in the refurbished community room. The old furnace worked beautifully. The kitchen had new ovens. There was a legal aid office, once-a-week transportation for medical appointments, and a homeowner protection program named not after me, but after Thomas's favorite saying, "Stay standing." Daniel did not sit at the head table that day. He volunteered in the kitchen. I watched him carry trays to seniors who once would have been names on a development map. He moved awkwardly at first, unsure where to place his hands, unsure how to be useful without being admired. Then Marilyn handed him a stack of plates and said, "Start with table 4. He did. Mr. Jenkins let Daniel pour him coffee that afternoon. He did not smile, but he said thank you. For Daniel, that was enough. Near the end of the luncheon, Denise asked me to stand. I hated that part, but I did it. People clapped, and this time I did not feel exposed. I felt surrounded. Daniel stood near the kitchen door, apron tied over his shirt, watching me with tears in his eyes. Afterward, he walked me to my Buick. "You still won't let me buy you a new car?" he asked. I gave him a look. He smiled faintly. "Had to try. You can start by fixing the passenger side speaker." "Yes, ma'am." He hugged me then. Not for a camera, not for a room, not for a story. For me. I hugged him back, but not like I had before, not with the desperate grip of a mother afraid her son might disappear if she loosened her arms. This time, I held him with love and boundaries together. That is possible, you know. You can forgive someone and still refuse to become small for them again. As we stood there outside Willow Creek, the late afternoon sun touched the windows of the old building, turning them gold. Children laughed near the entrance. Seniors carried leftovers in foil-covered plates. Marilyn waved from the doorway. Mr. Jenkins shouted that Daniel had better not forget the coffee next week. For the first time in a long time, I felt Thomas near me. Not as grief, as peace. Daniel looked at the building, then at me. "You saved this place," he said. I shook my head. "No, we all did." He nodded slowly, and I knew then that my victory was never about shaming my son the way he had tried to shame me. It was about making him see the mother he had overlooked, see the community he had underestimated, see that dignity does not disappear with age, poverty, grief, or an old blue dress. That night at the gala, my son tried to make me invisible. But in the end, the whole room turned against him, because they had already seen me. And finally, so did he. Lessons and message. There are people in this world who mistake quietness for weakness. They see an old car, an old dress, an old house, or gray hair, and they assume there is nothing powerful left inside that person. But some of the strongest lives are not loud. They are built in hospital rooms, kitchens, porches, church basements, community centers, and long nights when no one is watching. A mother's sacrifice should never become a child's shame. Aging does not erase dignity. Needing simplicity does not mean lacking value, and love, even a mother's love, should never be used as permission to disrespect, control, or humiliate. Eleanor's story reminds us that forgiveness is not weakness either. Real forgiveness can come with boundaries. It can say, "I love you, but I will not let you harm me." It can open a door without handing over the keys to your self-respect. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you loved? Have you ever had to stand up for your dignity later in life? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from and what time it is there, and if stories about family truth, justice, and healing speak to you. Please subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that they are not invisible. That was his first mistake. His second was believing that no one else knew who I really was. By the time he invited me to that gala, the distance between us had grown so wide that even love had trouble crossing it. Still, when I saw his name light up my phone one gray Thursday afternoon, my heart lifted before my pride could stop it. That is the foolish, faithful thing about a mother's heart. Even after years of being made to feel small, it still hopes the next call will sound like love. I answered softly, standing in my kitchen beside the old yellow curtains Thomas had always hated. "Hello, Daniel." "Mom," he said, bright and polished, using the voice he saved for clients. "I need you to come to an event with me. Not, I'd like you there. Not, it would mean a lot. I need you." Even then, I should have heard the warning in it, but all I heard was my son asking for me. And for one brief, tender moment, I let myself believe he was finally ready to remember who I was.